Jon Snow stood atop the crest of a gentle rise, staring out over the endless expanse of white tundra, with its snow-drenched hills and frozen ravines. The wind sighed against the folds of his wool and fur cloak, swirling snow around his worn black boots. The cold pricked at his cheeks, and the memory of the wall, the imposing barrier he had once called home, still weighed heavily on his mind. But beyond the frigid winds, the frost-bitten grounds, and the vast emptiness, Jon felt something stirring in his chest. It felt like the faintest flicker of warmth, some calling that had guided him northward far beyond the ancient ice-blocked boundary that once stood between Westeros and the Free Folk. And now he was here, no longer a sworn brother of the Night's Watch, no longer a nameless bastard of Winterfell, but a man on the cusp of destiny. He had not come by personal choice. Events had aligned in ways that neither men nor gods could have predicted. The lands beyond the wall were a swirl of rumor and confusion. After the Great War against the undead, after the living's triumph over the darkness, the Free Folk had scattered to survive. Some had returned to their old ways, some attempted to settle in the Gift, and some had simply vanished into the blank white unknown. Those who remained pressed north, searching for a life in the savage cold, for a new home that only the toughest or the most desperate could endure. It was a land that had always been harsh, but what little peace they had managed to hold onto was now threatened by looming nightmares of an uncertain future. And in the midst of this swirling chaos, word began to spread like the northern wind. A new leader had emerged, one touched by both warg lore and the blood of old Westeros, blessed or cursed by prophecy, a man who had united the wildlings before. The man who fought side by side with them against the dead. They whispered Jon Snow's name. King Crow, Ghost Brother, the man who came back from death and yet refused a crown in the south. In the frosted darkness of northern nights, Tormund Giantsbane and other Free Folk told tales of Jon's valor, of his cunning, his compassion, and the might of his sword arm. They spoke of his knowledge of the Watch, of the secret ways to survive the bitter cold, and of his ties by blood to the great Stark family. They said he was a man who could talk to wolves and guide them, who seemed more spirit than man at times. Among the Free Folk, rumor and story carried a power beyond the understanding of lords and ladies in southern halls. And now, the Free Folk were a broken people needing a champion, a king who would not kneel to southern politics or break faith with those who had once called him brother. Jon never set out to be crowned. He had returned north with little more than a desire to find respite from the endless betrayals and politics of the Seven Kingdoms. He had left behind the seat of a king in the south. The Iron Throne, the great armies, the cunning lords, it all weighed on him too heavily, as though the memories would crush the very breath from his lungs if he lingered in that realm. The moment his sentence was given, exiled to the Night's Watch, though the true meaning of that oath was in tatters, he found no reason to remain near the burdens that had nearly destroyed him. So he rode north, guided by what he still believed was right, uncertain if he could ever find peace. The handful of wildlings and loyal companions who followed him did so out of their own sense of duty, or admiration, or love. He knew Tormund Giantsbane followed him because Tormund believed Jon was more than just a sworn brother of the Watch. Tormund had seen Mance Rayder in him, but also something new. They walked for weeks past the wall, forging deeper into this land of unrelenting cold. Their days had been spent trudging through hills blanketed with fresh snow, their nights huddling for warmth in abandoned huts or under rock overhangs, the ring of steel always near at hand in case new threats loomed in the darkness. Jon's direwolf, Ghost, prowled the perimeters, his white coat rendering him an eerie silhouette against the silent night. The northern lights glimmered overhead like a promise, or a warning, or a silent expression of magic far older than men. All the while Jon felt the presence of eyes upon him, Free Folk, Watchers, Whites, or ghosts of the ancient forest, he could never be sure. Eventually, straggling groups of wildlings approached him. They came in ones and twos, families and friends, speaking of hunger, of disease, of skirmishes with raiders even further north who had grown desperate. Some among those northern raiders had begun worshipping dark forces, they said, offering savage sacrifices to stave off the long night that threatened again. Others had turned to cannibalism in the hopeless depths of winter. The Free Folk who came to Jon did so warily, but each time, Tormund and the others championed Jon's cause, telling them the tales of how Jon had bled for the free folk once before, had let them through the wall to save their lives, how he had been willing to face the wrath of his own sworn brothers, for the sake of those he called the people. Jon did not feel like a savior. He felt like a man burdened by regrets and half lost in sorrow. But each time he saw the reflection of moonlight on a child's wide eyes, each time he saw the exhausted gaze of a mother with no food to feed her family, he felt something old stirring in his chest. He was once a man of the Night's Watch, sworn to protect the realms of men. He realized then that these people were part of those realms, whether the lords south of the wall understood it or not. "I can't abandon them," he once told Tormund in the hush of a cold dawn. Tormund had chuckled, clapped him on the back, and said that was the reason why Jon would make a better leader than any of them could hope for. And so the word began to spread faster. More flocked to Jon's encampment, some out of curiosity, some in desperate need, some out of the memory that he had once been something like a king's right hand to Mance Rayder himself. Soon they numbered in the hundreds, then more. They built makeshift shelters around the edges of a deep gorge where they found a partially thawed river, a source of water. Hunters ventured out for game, though prey was scarce. A few wandered back south to scavenge what might be found in the abandoned forts or settlements. Others took to building small fires, forging alliances with other families that had once been their rivals. They looked to Jon for guidance, for a plan, for hope. Without meaning to, he found himself standing before these desperate people and offering them a kind of leadership. Late one evening the murmur began. "He's the king beyond the wall, the new Mance." The label irritated Jon. He didn't want to be that. He couldn't see himself as Mance Rayder's successor. Mance had been charismatic, a man who held a tune in his heart, who saw the free folk as a single family. Jon was uncertain, weighed by the tragedies of war. He would have walked away if it didn't mean leaving them all to a cruel fate. But every morning, the hungry gathered around him. Every time he spoke, they listened. Every time a question arose, about how to handle a scarcity of supplies, about how to keep their fires burning, he was the one they asked. Unwanted though it might be, the mantle of responsibility was thrust upon him. After a time, Tormund and the elders suggested that a formal gathering be held, to officially anoint Jon as king beyond the wall, so that the people would unify under one name and one banner. The free folk, once scattered in countless clans and tribes, needed something to bring them together. Jon argued against it. "We don't need a king," he insisted. "We never did before." But Tormund only gave him a wry grin. "Hey, that's what Mance said at first. But look at what he built. He united the free folk. He gave us a chance against the White Walkers, and we'd have all died if not for him, if not for you. The people need more than a memory of Mance. They need a flesh and blood man who's walked both sides of the wall." Narrow. Jon knew that Tormund was right, knew that for better or worse, this was his fate now. And so, in a clearing of trampled snow and pine, circled by torches that struggled to hold back the winter's chill, Jon Snow allowed them to name him king beyond the wall. He stood with Ghost at his side, the great direwolf's red eyes gleaming in the flicker of firelight. In that moment, he reflected on all that had happened, his life as a bastard in Winterfell, his oath to the Night's Watch, the battle against the dead, his short reign in the south that he never truly embraced, and his final banishment. And now this, a crown of chipped black iron set upon his dark hair, hammered together from old scraps and bits, more a symbol than a real regalia, bestowed by these people who called him their savior. At first, the hush among them was uneasy. They watched Jon like uncertain beasts, gauging his reaction, wondering if he would slip away from them. But he raised one gloved hand and called for them to stand together. "I am not your king in the way that Southerners name a king," he said, his voice echoing among the pine. "We stand free, but I accept this burden because if we do not unite we shall be torn apart by hunger, by the cold, by our enemies. So I say we come together now, as one people, and we survive. I will do what I must to keep you safe." A rousing cheer overcame the clearing, raw and spirited. They lifted torches, banged swords on shields, roared approval in guttural yells that rose to the star-filled sky. Jon stared out over them, his heart pounding. He saw men and women, children clinging to their mothers, warriors with rough-hewn faces, old folk trembling against the cold. He saw unity where once there had been fragmentation, and he felt a surge of resolve he hadn't known he still possessed. That night, they feasted on whatever meager rations they had, though it was precious little. And in the fireside's glow, John felt something akin to acceptance and resolution, if not happiness, then at least a sense of purpose. He recalled the vow he once swore, "I am the shield that guards the realms of men." Here he was, parted from the wall he had once called home, yet still he was fulfilling that oath, in a way he could never have predicted. The next days moved in a blur of activity. Word spread among the scattered wildling clans that Jon Snow was crowned. Many arrived with suspicion, uncertain if this bastard-turned-king was a figure to revere or despise. But Tormund, Val and the others who knew Jon well vouched for him. He met with each clan's leaders, learned their names, their worries. Some asked for hunting rights in certain forests, others worried about the rumored raider tribes to the far north who practiced vile rituals. Others still wanted to push south again, claiming the gift or the abandoned farmland near the wall. But Jon urged caution, explained that they could not rely on the largesse of the Night's Watch or southern lords. He reminded them that tensions might flare anew if too many wildlings ventured back across the wall. "We must find our own way," he insisted. "But we will not stand alone either." He took pains to direct scouts, men and women who knew the land, to chart out potential safe havens. They spoke of valleys hidden by jagged mountains, of ancient fortresses half swallowed by snow, of forest enclaves teeming with game, if one could reach them without dying in the attempt. Winter was not letting go of its hold, not fully, even though the White Walkers had been defeated. The nights remained deadly cold, the wind sharper than Valyrian steel, and frostbite took a grim toll on the weaker among them. Jon organized the forging of a communal store of food, meager though it was, and insisted on rationing. He gave orders that the strong should help the weak, an unusual notion for some among the free folk who believed survival was a personal endeavor. But gradually they saw that coming together was necessary if they were to forge something resembling a sustainable future. All the while Jon felt the haunting presence of the north. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, he sensed the swirl of magic that had once animated the others. He knew the threat was vanquished, but the memory haunted him. The winds carried a lingering hush, as if the dead might rise again. He often found ghosts seated at the edge of the encampment, ears perked, gazing out at the unknown. Jon would join him sometimes, running gloved fingers through the direwolf's thick white fur, remembering how he had once felt the presence of the Stark's ancestral magic. Ghost stared back at him, eyes glowing red in the moonlight, as though to remind Jon that their bond transcended the mundane. Days turned into weeks. The settlement they built around the gorge evolved from a small camp of hides and hastily built wooden huts into something larger, an impromptu town of snow-laden roofs and winding paths trodden into the drifts. Hunters organized themselves into teams, returning with game that was cause for communal feasting on good days, or only enough scraps to keep everyone on the brink of survival on bad days. Women and men labored to gather firewood and dried peat, to construct better insulation, to trade skills, sewing, tanning hides, forging arrowheads. There were no lords or ladies here, though some families had once held prestige among the free folk. Instead, there was only the necessity of living together. The spirit of freedom still burned strong. The difference now was they had a leader who understood them yet also understood the world to the south. A man who had glimpsed the machinations of kingdoms, but chose to stay here, in the cold. It was not a smooth path. Some men chafed under Jon's authority, especially those who remembered the days when Mance Rayder was their king beyond the wall. They challenged Jon. They spat at his boots, calling him a crow, a traitor, a kneeler. One night, a man named Drog slunk into Jon's tent with a sharpened knife. He found Ghost waiting. By morning, they discovered Drog's body in the snow, throat torn out, a battered blade still clenched in his stiffening hand. Jon had not wished that man's death, but it was a reminder that leadership here was not about a crown. It is about survival and might. The free folk respected strength, and the direwolf's savage defense spoke volumes. Jon was forced to stand before them and speak of unity, to remind them that the threat of betrayal sowed only ruin among themselves. He saw in their eyes a grudging acceptance. More would test him, he knew. A few might plan to desert, to form new clans far from his influence. But enough believed in him. Enough saw that he had bled for them, would bleed again if needed. The first real test of his reign came when rumors reached them that a group of child robbers had struck a cluster of free folk only a day's march west, kidnapping 2 young girls. These child robbers were rumored to be from a savage tribe that worshipped strange gods. Jon immediately readied a rescue party. Tormund, Val, and a dozen of the settlement's fiercest fighters joined him. They left under a sky choked with swirling snow, trudging over uneven ground as the wind howled. Ghost padded at Jon's side. The trek took the better part of a day, and by dusk, they found the burned-out remains of a campsite. Empty huts smoldered, the snow around them stained with blood. Tracks led away, disorganized but distinct enough for seasoned hunters to follow. They pressed on in the darkness, guided by flickers of a distant fire. At last, they came upon a grim sight, a ring of hide tents lit by guttering torches. Figures moved in the half-light, shadows licking across crude totems of bone and skull. The howling wind carried the sound of children crying. Jon motioned for silence. His heart pounded. He remembered the horrors he had seen in the Great War. But there was something else about this. Something personal. It was the new reality of the free folks fracturing. The others had united them, ironically, but now old barbarities returned. Jon gestured to Tormund, who nodded. They advanced with weapons unsheathed. The fight was brutal and brief. The savages wore furs stripped from beasts and men alike, their gaunt faces painted with what looked like ash and blood. They rushed forward with bone daggers, shrieking prayers to dark gods. Jon's party met them in a swirl of steel. Tormund's great axe slammed into a savage's chest, while Val danced around another, her spear flashing in the torchlight. Jon parried a dagger thrust, drove Longclaw forward, and felt the blade bite deep. 2 more wild figures howled and charged him. He sidestepped the first, lashing out with the pommel of his sword, to send the man tumbling into the snow. The second came from behind, only to be seized by Ghost's jaws around his arm. The savage's scream pierced the frigid air. In the chaos, a fire spread through one of the tents, illuminating the frightened faces of the kidnapped children, cowering within. Jon shouted for someone to free them. Another savage lunged at him, crying out about their winter king. Jon met the onslaught with grim determination, remembering the countless foes he had faced. He felt that old muscle memory returning, a sorrow-laced adrenaline. In a matter of moments, the savage lay dead in the snow. When the clamor subsided, the rescuers found the 2 girls, battered but alive. Tormund hefted them into his arms, and Jon quickly surveyed the carnage. At least half a dozen of the dark worshippers lay dead, their crude weapons scattered. 1 or 2 had fled into the night. A few of Jon's party were wounded, though not mortally. They returned to the settlement victorious, if victory was a word one could use in such a savage land. The rescued children's mother fell upon them in tears of relief. The rest of the free folk stared at Jon Snow with a mixture of awe and something darker, fear. He realized in that moment that as king beyond the wall, he would be the one who made decisions about how to deal with such roving threats. And the next day he stood before them, voice resonating in the cold morning air, and declared that they would protect one another from all dangers that lurked in the wilderness, that they would root out the evils festering in the north. The settlement roared approval, brandishing weapons and fists. In their eyes, Jon saw something new, a fervent belief that they were no longer scattered families, but a united people under his rule. Yet unity did not come without cost. The threat of starvation loomed. The patch of land around the gorge was not enough to sustain them. They needed new territory, better resources. The further north they went, the harsher the land became. And to go south might spark conflict with the Night's Watch or the Lords of the Gift, who still harbored resentments and fears regarding the free folk. Jon wrestled with these questions, pacing within the small log hall they had built near the largest fire pit. He met with Tormund, Val, and other leaders, trying to chart out a plan. Some insisted they must strike south once again, cross the wall, and find a place to settle in the Gift. Jon shook his head. We made a bargain once before. There are still men of the Watch on the wall. If we push south in large numbers, it will spark another war. He suggested that they might seek out rumored fertile valleys further north, near the Frostfangs, or beyond. The stories told of hidden glens warmed by steaming geysers, though the journey would be perilous. The elders nodded thoughtfully. Tormund muttered that if they did not find a new land, the free folk would wither. Val stood beside John, arms crossed over her fur cloak, her resolute gaze scanning the circle of assembled leaders. "We are free folk," she said. "We make our own destinies, but we do it together. John has led us well. Let's trust him." So it was decided. They would move. Not all at once, but in waves. Scouts, builders, families, to seek a new home in a place the legends called the Valley of Hot Springs. John himself was skeptical that such a paradise existed in these frozen wastes, but he could not deny the stories that had filtered in from travelers who glimpsed plumes of warm mist rising from the ground. If there was a chance, they had to take it. The entire settlement spent weeks gathering supplies, preparing sleds, forging new furs and leathers for the journey. John oversaw it all with a quiet determination, feeling that they were at a critical juncture. If they found nothing, they might be forced to crawl back, weaker and more desperate than ever. But if they succeeded, they would have a realm of their own, a place to truly be free. The journey began under steel-gray skies with a mass exodus of people and their meager possessions. Children huddled in sleds pulled by hardy northern ponies or half-wolf dogs, while the adults trudged alongside, spears and bows slung over shoulders. Ghost loped at the forefront, a silent sentinel. John rode a stocky horse, cloak flapping in the wind, crown tucked away in his saddlebag. He had no taste for wearing it on a long trek through the wilderness. Tormund led the vanguard, his laughter echoing in the thin air, though behind his joking facade John sensed a determined readiness for any threat. Val coordinated the supply lines, ensuring no family strayed. Over 1,000 souls moved in slow lines across the shifting terrain, leaving behind the gorge settlement which had served as an early sanctuary. Each day's march was a test of endurance. The wind bit with an unfriendly chill, and the sun seemed reluctant to show its face for long. They encountered stretches of icy rivers, where crossing meant risking broken limbs or worse. Occasionally they stumbled upon old battlefields from the war against the dead, frozen corpses half buried in snow, shattered dragonglass weapons. The memories weighed heavily, a reminder that even if the others were vanquished, their legacy still stained the land. Each night, the traveling host built a ring of fires, posted lookouts, and huddled together in tents. John would walk among them, checking on the injured and the elderly, offering what reassurance he could. He saw the doubt etched in their faces, the fear that they might be walking to their doom. Yet none turned back. The idea of a new home, a new beginning, was too precious. One morning, the scouts brought word of a forward settlement. An old wildling village nestled at the foot of a mountain range, abandoned for unknown reasons. John led a small party to investigate. They found huts of stone and timber, half collapsed, a few blackened by some past fire. The remains of an old watchtower rose from the snow like a broken tooth. Inside one hut they discovered aged skeletons huddled together, perhaps a family that had starved or frozen. Tormund examined the remains with a somber frown. "I've seen places like this. Sometimes entire villages vanish when the winter turns cruel." They spent the night in that village, repairing a few huts for shelter from a particularly brutal storm. The wind screamed across the broken watchtower, rattling the timbers. John dreamed of the wall, of standing upon its heights while the dead marched below. He awoke with a start, breath misting in the cold air, Ghost's red eyes regarding him calmly from the corner. He wondered if the free folk could ever truly find peace in this land that gave nothing freely. On they went, day after day. The landscape grew more mountainous, the hills steeper, the valleys narrower. Snowdrifts rose above their heads in places, forcing them to hack and clear paths. Some nights, they lost people. A child succumbed to illness. An older man vanished, likely claimed by the freezing dark. Joan's heart grew heavy with each loss, and he redoubled efforts to maintain morale. Sometimes, the only comfort was the flickering glow of campfires, and the defiant laughter of Tormund, who insisted on telling bawdy jokes to keep spirits from sinking. After weeks of endless trudging, they finally reached a ridge that overlooked a sweeping valley. Steam curled upwards in drifting clouds, half hidden by falling snow. The land below was a patchwork of jagged rock formations and pockets of green. Even from their vantage point, they could see vegetation, actual green shrubs and pine, incongruous in the midst of such frigid surroundings. A wide river cut through the center, partially frozen. The warm springs appeared to seep into it, creating ribbons of mist that curled into the sky. At the far end of the valley rose a line of rocky cliffs. That was where the steam seemed thickest, as though subterranean fires heated the ground. A hush fell over the traveling free folk as they came to stand on the ridge, gazing down at this hidden valley. It wasn't exactly the paradise of legend, but it was more alive than any land they had seen beyond the wall since leaving Hardhome or the then lands. John felt a stirring of hope. He dismounted, letting his horse breathe heavily, steam pouring from its nostrils. He could see Tormund's grin, saw Val's approving nod, and heard the murmurs of awe ripple through the crowd. The descent was treacherous, but they managed it. Once they reached the valley floor, they tested the waters of the river. It was cold, but not as cold as the rest of the land. Near certain rocky outcroppings, hot springs bubbled up, their warmth melting the surrounding snow. In that swath of heated ground, hardy grasses and shrubs took root, and the scent of mineral-rich steam hung in the air. The free folk wasted no time exploring, fanning out to assess potential shelter sites. Some discovered shallow caves in the valley walls. Others found stands of stunted pine and sparse forests that might provide lumber. Within a few days, they began constructing the framework of a new settlement, gathering boulders and stone to build walls. Men and women worked side by side, forging crude but functional structures. They set up communal fire pits near the largest hot spring, which provided a steady sulfuric warmth that offset the biting cold. Scouts returned reporting signs of game in the valley's fringes, mountain goats, hares, even a small herd of caribou that wandered in through a pass. If they could establish themselves here, they might just survive. John felt an odd sense of calm. He roamed the perimeter with Ghost, always cautious. The valley's natural warmth created frequent fog banks, swirling mists that made it easy to lose one's bearings. Still, it was better than the open tundra. One late afternoon, while patrolling alone, John came upon a cluster of standing stones etched with runes. They looked ancient, covered in lichen and faint frost. He knelt, brushed snow from the carvings, and felt a tremor of old magic. It reminded him of the weirwood trees, of the faces carved by the children of the forest. The runes were in no language he recognized, but they might have been from a time before the first men. Ghost prowled around them quietly, ears twitching. John felt watched, though he saw no one. The wind rustled the valley shrubs, carrying the faint hiss of steam. He stood, pressing his palm to the largest stone. For a moment, he closed his eyes and thought he heard a distant whisper. Perhaps a memory of the old gods or some leftover resonance from ancient words. It drifted away, leaving him uncertain whether he had truly heard anything. As he made his way back to the fledgling settlement, he could not shake the sense that this valley was more than just a refuge. It had secrets older than men. In the weeks that followed, the free folk settlement, soon dubbed Steamfall by some who marveled at the endless hot springs, began to take shape. They built huts of stone and timber around a central gathering space. The largest spring became a kind of communal bath, though the water was nearly scalding in places. People warmed themselves there, easing sore muscles and washing away grime. Game proved more plentiful than expected, though still not enough for gluttony. They learned to supplement their diets with tough mountain plants, with fish from the river that trickled through the valley. Children laughed as they explored the odd pockets of green. Some old tensions even eased. Many who had once doubted Jon Snow's leadership found themselves grudgingly grateful. But new challenges were never far off. Scouts had spotted movement in the higher passes, bands of raiders, or perhaps other wildling clans. A trickle of new arrivals entered the valley, hearing of the king beyond the wall and his warm refuge. Some came peacefully, seeking a share of the land. Others arrived bristling with hostility, demanding a place at spear point. And so Jon found himself once again in the position of forging alliances or facing conflict. During one such encounter, a group of fierce warriors known as the Iceborn came to the valley's edge, bearing tattoos of wolves and crows across their arms, with hair braided and tied in icy lumps. Their leader, a scarred woman named Karsa, demanded that Jon prove himself if he wished them to join his kingdom. "Why should we kneel to you?" she spat. "We are the Iceborn. We take what we need." Jon faced her calmly, aware that a direct challenge could lead to bloodshed. He spoke to Karsa of unity, of the dangers of the land, and how Steamfall could be a haven for all free folk. Karsa only sneered. "We kneel to no man." Tormund let out a booming laugh. We're a free folk. We don't kneel, you thick-skulled goat. But we do follow a leader we respect. Jon Snow's done more for our people than any warlord with a big mouth. Karsa's expression darkened. Words. Show me deeds. Fight me, if you want my spear at your side. Jon sighed. He had hoped to avoid this. But among the free folk there was a time-honored tradition. The strong lead. So he nodded. They cleared a circle. Karsa stepped forward, brandishing twin axes carved from some black stone. Tormund handed Jon a spear. Jon shook his head, unbuckled Longclaw from his belt. If there had to be a contest, he would use the weapon he knew best. It was a brutal duel. Karsa lunged with surprising speed, axes whirling. Jon parried, pivoting to avoid a blow that would have opened his ribs. The crowd cheered, forming a ring around them. Ghost stalked the perimeter, hackles raised, but Jon gave a soft whistle to keep the direwolf back. Karsa grinned, circling like a hunting cat. She swung one axe high, forcing Jon to block overhead, then slashed low with the other. Jon twisted aside, ignoring the jolt of pain in his shoulder from a too narrow dodge. He retaliated with a thrust aimed at her gut. She knocked the blade aside with a deft flick. Their breaths misted in the air, muscles straining. Karsa was strong, but Jon had faced worse. Memories of his battles against White Walkers, against Ramsay Bolton, against the undead horde flashed through his mind. He waited until she overcommitted on a swinging strike, then sidestepped and brought Longclaw slashing across her midsection. The blade cut through leather and bit into flesh. She hissed, stumbling. Jon pressed the advantage, knocking one axe from her hand. With the other she slashed wildly, scoring a shallow wound across Jon's forearm. Pain flared, but he gritted his teeth, drove in close, and bashed her temple with the pommel of Longclaw. She tumbled to the snow, blood staining her side. Silence reigned. Karsa lay panting, face contorted in anger and pain. Jon leveled Longclaw at her throat but did not press the point. Yield, he said quietly. She spat out blood. Her eyes blazed with defiance. Then, slowly, she relaxed her grip on her remaining axe. I yield, she whispered. A roar of approval burst from the onlookers. Tormund helped Karsa to her feet, while Val quickly approached to check Jon's wounds. Karsa glared at Jon, then gave a curt nod. I have no love for Crow Kings, but I can respect a man who fights with heart. The Iceborn will join you, for now. Jon exhaled, relief mingling with the burn of pain in his arm. Another clan swayed to their cause, albeit grudgingly. He looked around at the cheering free folk, at the children who regarded him with hope in their eyes, at the older men and women who nodded in approval. He was reminded that kingship among the free folk was forever precarious, forever bound to show of strength and the good of the people. Time passed. Steamfall grew. More huts rose. Scouts explored further, marking potential farmland near some of the warmer pockets of Earth. Fishermen built small rafts to navigate the river. The free folk began establishing a sense of normalcy. Celebrations on nights when they snared a particularly large catch, hunts that brought back caribou meat, births welcomed with communal joy. Jon felt a quiet satisfaction to see families no longer huddled in desperation, but beginning to carve out something akin to a new life. However, not all was peaceful. Reports trickled in of an organized band of raiders who raided small outposts, pillaging supplies, abducting women. Some said they worshipped a dark ice god, similar to the savage tribe Jon had faced before. Others insisted they were simply desperate. Rumor had it their leader was a man called Herrick the Frosthand, a towering brute rumored to have frostbitten fingers turned black and numb. Jon ordered patrols to guard the valley, hoping to deter attacks. But one night, a band of these raiders slipped in under cover of fog. They killed a family on the settlement's outskirts and set fire to 2 huts before the alarm was raised. By the time Jon and his guards arrived, the raiders vanished into the white night, leaving behind smoke, blood, and corpses. Anger flared within the settlement. They clamored for retribution. Tormund led a scouting party out the next morning to track them. Ghost joined the hunters, bounding away across the drifts. Jon remained behind to organize the settlement's defenses, but every moment he felt the sting of helplessness. That night, Tormund returned, cursing their luck. The raiders had slipped away, covering their tracks in the rocky high passes. But Tormund learned that there were more than just a dozen bandits. They number at least 40, he said grimly, and might have allies further north. Jon summoned Karsa and her Iceborn warriors, as well as other clan leaders. We can't wait for them to strike again, he said. We must hunt them down. The Free Folk leaders agreed. They organized a war party of nearly 50 fighters. Jon, Tormund, Karsa, Val. They would track Herrick's band and put an end to their raids. The rest of the settlement would remain on high alert, guarding Steamfall. They departed before dawn, guided by a swirl of fresh snow that threatened to erase all tracks. Ghost ran far ahead, nose low to the ground, occasionally vanishing into the mists. They followed him through a narrow pass into the higher mountains, the terrain growing more perilous. Sheer drops lurked beneath the snow, and frigid winds cut through even the thickest firs. Still they pressed on. Occasional signs showed the raiders' passage, boot prints in a drift, the remains of a cooking fire. By the third day, they came upon a hidden hollow where the raiders had camped. Jon's war party found grisly remains, the butchered bodies of travelers, men and women, likely from smaller bands of free folk who roamed too close. Rage welled in Jon. This was no matter of survival. Herrick's band killed for sport, for cruelty. That evening, the trackers pushed even harder, determined to end the threat. On the fourth day, they reached a deep ravine overshadowed by cliffs. Ghost halted, growling low. Jon advanced cautiously. Beneath the overhang of ice-laden boulders, he spotted the flicker of torchlight. The war party spread out quietly, forming a half-circle around the ravine's entrance. Tormund caught Jon's eye, nodded. They struck at dusk. Val fired an arrow that took one guard in the throat. Karsa led a furious charge, axes raised high. The raiders responded with feral screams, brandishing swords and crude clubs. Torches flickered madly in the swirling wind, casting monstrous shadows on the rocky walls. Jon felt the red mist of battle descend, blocking out the chill of the air. He fought with purpose, Longclaw cleaving through a raider's hide armor, then turning aside another's blade. He glimpsed Herrick among them, a huge man with blackened hands, lips curled in a snarl. The fighting was fierce. The raiders, though outnumbered, were desperate. They fought like cornered beasts. But the free folk had come prepared. Karsa's savage war cries rallied her Iceborn warriors, who battered the raiders with unstoppable fury. Tormund swung his axe with deadly precision, bellowing curses. Val danced among them with her spear, nimble and accurate. Jon pressed forward, catching sight of Herrick again. The leader wore a necklace of bones and shards of ice that glittered in the torchlight. He looked at Jon, spat, then rushed forward with a curved blade. They clashed in a spray of sparks and howling wind. Herrick was strong, each blow driving Jon back a step. The blade whistled near Jon's face, shearing off the tip of his fur hood. Jon countered with a backhand slash, opening a gash across Herrick's shoulder. The man only roared, seemingly maddened by pain. His blackened fingers gripped the hilt with white knuckles. Their blades clashed again, steel ringing on steel. Jon felt the sting of a cut along his ribs. Ghost lunged in, snapping at Herrick's leg, forcing him to shift stance. Seizing the opening, Jon feinted high, then rammed Longclaw straight into Herrick's chest. Blood spurted. Herrick's eyes widened and he sank to his knees, the curved blade clattering to the stones. Silence settled over the ravine as the last of the raiders fell or fled into the darkness. The Free Folk war party stood, panting, weapons coated in blood. Herrick gazed at Jon with hate and something like awe. He choked out, "Darkness awaits you, bastard king," before collapsing. Jon pulled Longclaw free, chest heaving. He stared at the lifeless body, feeling no triumph, only a weary acceptance that sometimes violence was the price of safety in this land. They found captives deeper in the ravine, 4 young women and 2 men, chained and shivering. The war party freed them, offered them warmth and furs. They searched the raiders' camp, gathering stolen supplies, burying the dead so that beasts would not devour them. Tormund and Jon exchanged a heavy look. "We did what needed doing," Tormund said. "Eh," Jon replied, though inwardly he felt the old weight of guilt. They returned to Steamfall battered but victorious, ensuring that the threat of Herrick's band would no longer loom over the settlement. The news heartened the people. They greeted Jon and his fighters with cheers, chanting, "Snow! Snow! Snow!" in a chorus that echoed off the valley walls. Bonfires lit the night. For the first time since crossing the wall, Jon permitted himself a moment of faint hope that they truly could build a life here. But part of him remained wary. The land beyond the wall was vast, and many dangers lingered. Seasons shifted, though slowly. Steamfall endured the tail end of winter and watched as the days lengthened. The gloom lifted slightly, and the sun's rays grew a little stronger, melting patches of snow along the hot springs. A trickle of travelers arrived from the south, bringing word that the Night's Watch had grown smaller, that fewer lords patrolled the gift. Some whispered that the new rulers of Westeros were too occupied with internal affairs to bother much about the wildlings anymore. Another rumor claimed that someone had seen a dragon in the distant skies, though most dismissed it as drunken talk or illusions cast by the shimmering northern lights. Jon found his mind drifting back to the family he had left behind, the friends who remained in the south. Arya, Sansa, Bran. Did they remember him? Did they think him lost in the wastelands of the true north? Sometimes the pang of those memories gripped him at night. He'd find himself gazing at ghosts and recalling direwolf pups in Winterfell's courtyard. Yet he knew his place was here now. He had been crowned king beyond the wall, and though he might never have asked for it, the free folk depended on him. He was determined not to fail them. To strengthen alliances, Jon hosted gatherings with newly arrived clans in Steamfall. The settlement grew, huts multiplying, fields of hardy root vegetables taking root near the river. Children ran through the mists laughing as parents learned to fish or hunt in cooperative groups. Karsa's Iceborn integrated themselves, forging uneasy friendships with Tormund's people. Now and then, disputes broke out, over a stolen pelt or a perceived insult, but more often than not they resolved them in the free folk way. A quick fight, or a talk around the communal fire, or occasionally a marriage arrangement to join two feuding families. In time, they erected a larger meeting hall near the center of Steamfall, constructed from the biggest pines they could fell and reinforced with stone. This hall served as a place to store supplies, to treat the wounded, and to host large feasts when the hunts were good. The free folk insisted Jon should have a seat there, a rudimentary throne of carved wood, though he cringed at the notion. Still, he allowed them to build it, reasoning that it gave them a symbol of unity. Late in the evenings, he often remained in the hall, poring over crude maps drawn from memory, trying to plan for the settlement's future. Val frequently joined him, her keen mind and understanding of the wildling ways helping to shape the settlement's governance. She had grown close to Jon, though not in the same way Ygritte once had. It was a friendship, a bond forged in fire and ice, each respecting the other's boundaries. Meanwhile, Tormund became something of a chief of scouts, leading expeditions to chart possible trade routes south. Though trade was a generous term, the Night's Watch hardly had much to offer. Still, Tormund believed a cautious exchange of goods might be possible, especially if they found a reliable path that avoided heavy conflict. Jon didn't discourage him, hoping that a tenuous peace could hold between Steamfall and the Night's Watch. He remembered his brothers in black, men who had died fighting by his side. He didn't want war with them. But tensions simmered. The watchers on the high ridges occasionally spotted black-clad patrols on the horizon. Jon received a report that a small band of free folk had tried to cross the wall near Eastwatch by the sea, only to be turned away violently. One man died from a crossbow bolt. Rumors spread that the Night's Watch, though diminished, was wary of the growing power in the north. Some claimed that the Watch's new Lord Commander, a hardliner named Riot, believed the free folk should be kept at bay by any means necessary. Jon called a meeting in the Great Hall. Tormund, Val, Karsa, and other clan leaders came, their breath clouding the lamplit air. They debated what to do about the Watchers in Black. Tormund suggested a diplomatic approach. "We show them we're not raiding anymore. We invite them to Steamfall. Let them see how we live." Karsa scoffed. "The crows won't care. They see us as wild beasts. They'll shoot first." Others argued for an aggressive stance. Push south, claim the gift for themselves. But Jon vehemently opposed that. He remembered how the free folk crossing the wall had sparked the conflict that cost Mance Rayder his life. They had only a fragile peace. Breaking it might lead to another slaughter. In the end, they settled on caution. No large group would venture south of the wall unless invited or allowed. They would focus on fortifying Steamfall, building up stockpiles, establishing guard posts on the main passes. Jon hoped that a more favorable chance for contact might arise, perhaps when the Watchers in Black realized Steamfall was no threat. Quietly, he also planned to send ravens south, if any could be found or borrowed from the Watch, to reach out to old friends in Winterfell, if they would even receive them. Another year slipped by. Steamfall grew stronger and more settled. They began domesticating the mountain goats, using them for milk and wool. Primitive mills were constructed to grind tough northern grains. Children thrived, learning to hunt and fish from a young age. The free folk shaped a community that was rough but surprisingly harmonious. Every so often a new clan arrived, lured by tales of the king beyond the wall's domain of warmth and freedom. Jon watched the population swell into the thousands. They spread out around the valley, building smaller hamlets near different hot springs. Steamfall became the seat of their new society, a rough frontier capital. And Jon Snow, who once desired no crown at all, found himself at the heart of it, beloved by many, challenged by a few, but respected by most. Yet for all that, the night still brought him dreams of the dead and memories of the White Walkers. The nightmares receded somewhat over time, but never vanished entirely. Sometimes he woke in a cold sweat, sure that he had heard the screech of an undead wight in the distance. Ghost would nuzzle him, calming him. Jon would rise, check on the settlement's defenses, and reassure himself that the threat was gone, that for now, at least, they were safe. One late autumn night, when the aurora shimmered green across the sky, Jon stood alone at the edge of Steamfall, gazing up at the dancing lights. He thought of all that had transpired, from his first days as a bastard in Winterfell, to the unthinkable tragedy of his murder at Castle Black, to his resurrection, to the wars and heartbreak that followed, to his final exile. Now here he was, king beyond the wall, forging a new realm. Ygritte's memory haunted him in that moment, her red hair, her fierce smile, her unwavering spirit. She would have loved to see the free folk united, building a place that was neither kneeling to the Iron Throne, nor cowering in the shadows. A tear glistened in Jon's eye before freezing on his cheek. He felt a presence behind him. Turning, he saw Val. She approached quietly, her breath silver in the chill air. "You're thinking of her," Val said gently. Jon nodded, not trusting his voice. She laid a hand on his arm. "I know. She meant a great deal to all of us." They stood together, looking out over the moonlit huts. Smoke curled from the chimneys, glowing embers in the night, proof of life in this savage land. "She wanted freedom for her people," Val said. "I think she'd be proud of what you've done." Jon swallowed, voice husky. "I hope so. I never wanted to be a king, but if it keeps them safe, I'll do it until the day I die." Val's eyes gleamed in the aurora's light. She stepped closer, her warmth a gentle reminder of life, and whispered, "Then do it well. For Ygritte, for all of us." Jon nodded. He thought of all the hardships they had overcome, and all the threats still lurking. In the back of his mind, he worried about the future. Could the free folk truly remain separate from the South forever? Would the Watch or the Lords eventually come marching north to put them under heel? And what about the ancient powers that still slept under the ice, or the distant beasts that soared on leathery wings? The world was vast and full of unknown perils. But for this moment at least they had built something resembling hope. The free folk called him their king beyond the wall, and for better or worse, he was determined to protect them, to guide them. He turned away from the lights in the sky, walking beside Val back into the settlement's heart. Fires flickered in hearths, silhouettes of families cast upon hut walls, the faint sound of laughter mingling with the hush of the wind. This was his realm now, a realm that had chosen him, and one he would give everything to defend. That winter, they faced fierce blizzards, but the hot springs provided a buffer against the worst of the cold. They fought off a resurgence of the cannibal tribes from the far north, forging alliances with smaller clans to drive them away. Steamfall continued to spread, huts and walls expanding, farmland tested in the patches of ground where the springs warmed the soil enough for certain hardy crops. Jon established a council of elders and warriors, hoping to balance the free folks' desire for independence with the practical need for organization. Though some chafed at the idea, Most saw the wisdom in it. They were still free folk, but with a sense of shared purpose that transcended clan rivalries. From time to time, traveling bards or traders found their way into Steamfall, bringing tales of the South. John listened from a distance, never quite ready to confront the memories of King's Landing or Winterfell. He heard rumors of new squabbles among the great houses, minor border disputes, the rebuilding of war-torn regions. None of it felt as pressing as the challenges facing them here. If anything, hearing how life continued in the Seven Kingdoms only solidified Jon's belief that he belonged in the far north. One night, a group of free folk from the frozen shore arrived, telling stories of monstrous sea creatures washing up on the icy beaches, creatures with pale flesh and too many eyes. They claimed it was an omen of dark times. Another clan from the interior spoke of a hidden fortress far beyond the mountains, rumored to hold lost knowledge of the children of the forest. Whispers circulated of old magic stirring in the deep woods and cave systems. Jon took these tales seriously. He had encountered enough of the uncanny to know that danger could lie anywhere, especially in legends that men dismissed as fantasy. Still, Steamfall thrived. The newly formed council managed disputes, organized hunts, distributed resources. A sense of cautious optimism spread among the free folk, many of whom had known only hardship. For the first time in living memory, they had a place that was truly theirs, guided by a leader who did not seek to dominate them, but to protect them. They had known Mance Rayder as a charismatic uniter, but Jon Snow was a different kind of king. He was quieter, haunted by ghosts, yet resolute in his sense of duty. Some found that even more reassuring, the knowledge that their king was not inflated by ego, but compelled by responsibility. Another year passed. Children grew older, new babies were born, and Steamfall became as much a home as any place could be in the savage north. They crafted better homes, some with multiple rooms, improved cooking methods, and even established a primitive system of bathing with heated water from the springs. The free folk were not civilized by southern standards, but they were forging something wholly their own, an identity that blended their old ways of freedom with a measure of solidarity they had never fully embraced before. Jon found himself training young warriors, drilling them in basic swordplay. He taught them discipline, some measure of formation, though the free folk preferred a looser style of fighting. He insisted they needed to be ready for anything. As he sparred with them, he recalled his own training under Sir Rodrik Castle at Winterfell, the disapproving looks he once received as the bastard boy. The memory no longer stung as it once did. He had come far from that life. Ghost remained at his side, though the direwolf often wandered the perimeter of the valley, leading other wolves that had been drawn by Steamfall's unique environment. Some families even tamed wolf pups, forging closer bonds with nature. The settlement gained a reputation for being guarded by man and wolf alike. Word spread to distant corners of the north. More free folk arrived. Steamfall's population swelled. The city, if one could call it that, became a hub of culture, trade, and gatherings for the scattered tribes. Through it all, Jon carried the burden of leadership. He presided over disputes, made decisions about resource allocation, mediated clan quarrels. He maintained a council to share responsibilities, but in the end, the people still looked to him. The crown of chipped black iron sat in the great hall, rarely on his head, but always a reminder of the oath he had taken. He thought often of the vow he once made at Castle Black. I am the sword in the darkness. I am the watcher on the walls. I am the shield that guards the realms of men. Now, he guarded a different realm, but the spirit of that vow lived on in him. Danger never vanished, of course. There were more skirmishes with tribes who refused any alliance, some of whom worshipped sinister powers. But each time Jon's warriors met the threat, driving them off or forcing them to submit. Steamfall established watchtowers at key passes, manned by rotating volunteers who signaled the city with horn blasts if intruders approached. Snares and pitfalls were dug. Herrick's old raiders might have been defeated, but others like them could rise. The wilderness was vast, and cruelty flourished in the cold. Jon found time for quiet reflection amid his kingly duties. Sometimes he visited the Ring of Ancient Stones, running a hand over the runes, and wondering about the old gods and the first men. On rare occasions he felt a flicker of something watching him, but he could not be sure if it was the old magic or his imagination. He never told anyone but Val about these moments, sensing that the free folk needed reassurance, not superstition. The council managed diplomatic overtures to the Night's Watch, sending a small delegation under a white flag. Tormund led them. They returned with stories of tense conversation. Lord Commander Riot refused to allow free folk across the wall, but he did not threaten war either. The Watch's numbers were too few for an all-out conflict, and perhaps they saw no profit in stirring the hornet's nest. Jon took this as cautious good news. If the Watchers in Black would leave them alone, then Steamfall could continue growing. And grow it did. Buildings rose along the riverbank, some with 2 stories, using stone foundations and timber frames. They erected a loom to weave cloth from goat wool, forging a rudimentary textile craft. Farmlands expanded in the pockets of warm soil. Val oversaw the construction of a wooden bridge across the river's narrower stretch, linking 2 parts of the settlement. Karsa and Tormund spearheaded the formation of a scouting militia that ranged further into the mountains, seeking resources and potential hazards. Life took on a rhythm. Festivals were held when the hunts were successful, with dancing and mead, children chasing each other through swirling mists lit by torches. On these nights, Jon would stand at the edge of the festivities, observing with a pensive smile. The free folk had truly carved out a new home. He remembered the days when they were scattered refugees fleeing the White Walkers, and marveled at how they had become a thriving community. It felt surreal. He could almost see Ygritte among them, laughing, full of fire and life. A bittersweet ache welled in him, but he let it settle. The dead belonged to the past, and the living needed him now. As the settlement matured, so too did Jon's leadership. He learned to trust his council. He delegated tasks. He accepted advice, even criticism, with humility. The free folk respected that he did not lord over them like a southern king, nor did he bow to petty demands. He held a certain sternness that came from his experiences, but tempered it with fairness. When a clan accused another of theft, Jon insisted on proof and open testimony before the council, something quite new to the wildling ways. They adapted grudgingly, and found that a measure of justice helped maintain harmony. Every so often, the question arose about the rest of Westeros. Would the free folk attempt to cross the wall in large numbers again? Some argued that they should, that the gift was fertile land stolen from them centuries ago. Jon always cautioned restraint. "We have enough here," he said. "War with the South will bring only sorrow. Build our home, strengthen our people, and let the South have its kings and queen." The majority agreed, but a few restless souls slipped away, intent on returning to the old ways of raiding. Some were never heard from again. A few returned wounded or starving, cursing the Watchers who still patrolled the wall. Jon wished them no ill will, only reminded them that each person must choose their path. Over the years, Steamfall's population nearly doubled. Caravans of free folk traversed the mountain passes regularly, exchanging goods with outlying settlements that had cropped up. Rough roads were established, though still dangerous in winter. They harnessed sled dogs and ponies to haul supplies. One winter, an avalanche blocked a key pass, cutting off contact with a smaller settlement for weeks. Jon organized a rescue party to dig them out, braving furious blizzards. The gratitude they received upon arrival was overwhelming. The free folk there had been on the brink of starvation. Jon returned to Steamfall with a renewed sense of solidarity. They were all in this together, forging a new realm in defiance of the dead winter. And so, this realm, the kingdom beyond the wall, took shape. Not a kingdom in the southern sense, no lords and castles, no knights on horseback, but a loose confederation of clans united under Jon Snow's guidance. They called him king in the north of the true north, the White Wolf. The Crow returned, names half in awe, half in affection. He accepted their praise with a humble nod, always conscious of the cost that had brought him here. On a solemn summer night, though summer was a generous term at these latitudes, Jon stood atop a rocky ledge that overlooked Steamfall. The city's lights glimmered below, a testament to the countless fires that warmed huts and communal halls. Smoke curled into the deep blue sky, where stars glittered like cold diamonds. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of wood smoke and mineral-laden steam. Jon gazed upon the settlement with a mingled sense of pride and lingering sorrow. He thought of Ned Stark, the father who had raised him as a bastard, never telling him the truth of his parentage. He thought of the secret that had once threatened to upend the realms of men, that he was not Ned's son, but Rhaegar Targaryen's. that he might have claimed the Iron Throne. Now that title mattered nothing to him. He had chosen a different crown, shaped from black iron by free folk forging their own destiny. In the distance he heard a faint howl. Ghost, perhaps, or another wolf. The sound reverberated through the night air, echoing across the valley. Jon felt a stirring within him, a gentle call that reminded him of the ancient bond he shared with his direwolf. He looked to the sky, where the blue-tinged aurora rippled like a curtain of ghosts. For a brief moment, he felt a connection to it all, the old gods, the free folk, the distant memory of his stark heritage. He whispered a silent prayer to those unnamed forces, hoping they would grant him the strength to continue leading these people, to keep them safe from the horrors of the frozen wilderness and from the creeping ambitions of the South. Then he turned and made his way down to the city's heart. Torches lit his path. Guards nodded respectfully as he passed. He could hear laughter coming from a nearby gathering, the clink of simple tankards, the smell of roasting goat. He saw children chasing one another, their cheeks flushed in the cool air, their laughter echoing. He offered a soft smile to them, remembering how seldom he had laughed as a child. This was why he fought, why he accepted the crown of the free folk, to give them the chance for joy, for life, beyond the tyranny of the dead or the oppression of the South. When he entered the great hall, Tormund greeted him with a boisterous salute, tankard in hand. Val was there too, conferring with some clan elders about a new farmland experiment. Karsa and her Iceborn stood off to one side, boasting about their latest hunting exploits. The hall bustled with activity, traders haggling, warriors regaling each other with stories of battles past, mothers nursing infants, elders debating new expansions. And at the far end, on a raised platform, rested the throne of chipped black iron. It looked out of place among the rough-hewn timbers and firs, yet it stood as a symbol of unity, a testament to the improbable kingdom they had forged. Jon made his way to that throne, but did not sit. Instead, he stood beside it, leaning on the pommel of Longclaw, listening to the conversation swirl around him. Tormund ambled over, cheeks ruddy from drink. "Ever going to sit on your fancy chair, King Crow?" he teased. Jon shook his head with a trace of a smile. "I sit when I must pass judgment, Tormund." Tormund snorted. "Judgment? We're free folk. We sort out our own scuffles except when they can't be sorted." He clapped Jon on the shoulder. "You've done well, Jon Snow." The sincerity in Tormund's eyes touched Jon. He dipped his head in thanks. Then Val joined them, carrying a strip of parchment with rough sketches of new farmland layouts. "We'll have more arable land if we redirect part of the hot spring," she said enthusiastically. "We can channel the water through these trenches." Jon listened, nodded. "That could increase our crops before winter returns full force." Across the hall, Karsa raised a spear in salute. She had come a long way from challenging Jon to a duel. The Iceborn clan now guarded Steamfall's northern perimeter. Warriors from other clans mingled with them, forging friendships that once would have been unthinkable. The night wore on, a tapestry of voices and warmth, while outside the valley walls, a brisk wind shook the trees. Jon felt a sense of resolve. This was only the beginning. The free folk would face new threats, always would. But they stood united, guided by a king who had known both the darkness and the light. He thought of the day he had accepted this crown, how reluctant he had been, yet how necessary it felt. He recalled the battles, the losses, and the victories that had shaped him. For better or worse, he was Jon Snow, king beyond the wall, and he would carry this duty until his final breath. On the far side of the hall, an old harpist plucked a haunting tune. The melody wove through the murmur of voices, evoking a sense of the ancient North. A hush settled over the crowd as they turned to listen. The harp's notes spoke of loneliness, of enduring cold, of a people forging their own path in a land of ice. Jon felt a lump in his throat. He wondered if the old gods listened to the music, if they watched from weirwoods far to the south, their red leaves rustling in the wind. When the song ended, a soft applause rippled through the gathering. Someone brought out more mead, distributing cups. Tormund roared for a toast. "To Jon Snow!" he bellowed. "The man who led us through winter's jaws and gave us a home we can call our own." The free folk raised their cups, cheering. Jon tried not to blush. He lifted his own cup in acknowledgement. "And to the free folk," he replied, his voice carrying through the hall. For forging a place of our own, together, may we continue to stand, united and free. They drank, the toast echoing into the wooden rafters, and for a moment John felt the weight of destiny settle lightly on his shoulders. Beyond these walls, the howling wind of the northern wilderness stretched on for leagues uncountable. But here, in Steamfall, life glimmered like a stubborn flame against the cold. It was a fragile flame, perhaps, yet it had caught hold, fed by courage and unity. And Jon Snow, once a bastard, once a brother of the Night's Watch, once a reluctant king in the south, now stood as its guardian. In the days to come, new challenges would arise. Shadows from the far north, tensions with the Watch, the unpredictability of the climate, and the magic that laced these lands. But for now, on this night of harpsong and hearthfire, Jon allowed himself a brief moment of peace. He closed his eyes, letting the warmth of the hall envelop him, and felt the comforting presence of ghosts somewhere just beyond the doorway, always on guard. He remembered a line Ygritte used to say, "You know nothing, Jon Snow." Perhaps there was still truth in that. There was so much yet to learn about the land beyond the wall, about the history buried under layers of ice, about the future that awaited them. But if he knew nothing else, he knew this. They had chosen him to lead, and he would not fail them. The free folk were his people now, no longer outcasts, but a nation in its own right, forging a path with grit and spirit in the face of a cold world that offered them no mercy. In that knowledge he found purpose, and maybe, just maybe, a sense of belonging he had long sought. And so, as torches flickered, and the aurora painted shifting curtains of green and violet above Steamfall, the king beyond the wall stood among his people, quietly resolute, guarding their fragile realm and their fragile hope against the endless winter, determined to keep them free and alive. For all his doubts, for all the ghosts that haunted him, Jon Snow had found his place at last, carved from ice and steam and the unbreakable will of a people who refused to kneel. He was their king, and in his silent heart he vowed he would be worthy of them, come what may. Jon woke before first light, roused from restless dreams by the soft growl of Ghost at the threshold of his hut. The direwolf's red eyes glowed in the faint embers left in the hearth. Outside, the wind pressed a hushed lament against the wooden walls, a reminder that even in the relative warmth of Steamfall, the far north remained a realm of subtle menace. Rolling from his cot, Jon pressed a hand to his face and felt the grit of sleeplessness under his lids. Yet he rose with the practiced discipline that had carried him through battlefields and dark nights, hooking his cloak over his shoulders and fastening it at the throat. He stepped out into the gray half-light. Steam drifted across the settlement like restless phantoms, rising from the hot springs that laced the valley. In the gloom, he glimpsed the half-finished tower the free folk had been constructing, its wooden scaffolding jutting toward a sky still pricked by faint stars. The watchman on the upper platform stirred and raised a hand in greeting. Jon nodded back. A perimeter of sharpened stakes and tall fences ringed the outer edges of Steamfall, enough to discourage casual marauders or wandering beasts. Beyond that, the rocky slopes glimmered with frost. A swirl of motion at his feet told him Ghost was trotting along, silent but keen-eyed. Though dawn had not yet broken, the settlement was stirring. A handful of hunters readied their bows and spears, preparing for an early foray into the pine-spotted foothills. One nodded at Jon, a brief sign of respect before joining the others. From a stone hut across the way, smoke rose in steady plumes, meaning the cooks were already at work. The smell of wood smoke and cooking goat permeated the air, reminding Jon of how far they had come. Not so many years ago, the free folk lived in scattered bands, starving in winter's jaws. Now they boasted a steady rhythm, hunters, foragers, craftspeople, watchers on the walls, enough to call themselves a realm. Jon made his way toward the large central hall that served as meeting chamber, feasting space, and supply depot all in one. As he walked, he passed a row of huts built close together, their walls plastered with mud to keep out drafts. In the courtyard, a few children were already chasing each other. They laughed and shouted, heedless of the cold, their breath trailing wisps in the air. Jon tried not to smile too openly. He was aware of the eyes upon him, conscious that some folks still found it odd that a man once called a crow had become their king. He dipped his head in greeting to an elderly woman tending a cooking fire. She eyed Ghost warily, but offered John a respectful nod. He continued on. The hall doors loomed ahead, hewn from thick pine logs bound with iron. Beside them stood a pair of watchmen, each armed with spears. They parted to allow him entrance, shoulders stiffening out of deference rather than fear. Within, the hall's interior glowed under the light of torches, and a row of shuttered windows placed high near the roof. Long wooden tables lined the space. Some clan representatives had already gathered, hunched over the remains of breakfast. Various skins and furs tacked to the walls softened the acoustics, so that their low conversation felt subdued rather than echoing. Near the far end, the black iron throne waited on its raised platform, a constant reminder that though they were free folk, they still looked to John for unifying leadership. He found Tormund Giantsbane at one of the tables, gnawing on a strip of salted goat, a half-empty horn of mead close at hand. His bushy red beard framed a broad grin as John approached. "Mornin', King Crow," Tormund said, wiping mead foam from his mouth with the back of his hand. "You look half ready to topple over. Did Ghost keep you up with his howling?" John shook his head. "If only it were that. I've too many thoughts swirling in my mind. Dreams of things I can't quite remember when I wake." "Now." Tormund clapped him on the shoulder in his usual hearty way. "Well, have some goat, wash it down with mead, and maybe those thoughts will settle. We've a council this morning, unless your memory's gone south." John exhaled. He had nearly forgotten. A meeting had been called to discuss concerns about the western passes and the rumored approach of another band of newcomers. Another clan was said to be drawn by Steamfall's relative security, and the free folk were never shy about new arrivals. But there were always questions, potential quarrels over land, hunts, or leadership. "Hey," John said. "I'll get to it." He took a seat at the table across from Tormund, ignoring the black iron throne for now. Soon enough the elders and clan chieftains would assemble, and he would be forced to preside. He spotted Val at the far side of the hall, conferring with two younger women who wore duskin cloaks. Val glanced Jon's way, offered him a polite nod, and resumed talking. There was an easiness about Val that John envied. She had adapted to leadership with a calm certainty, bridging the feuds and complexities of the wildling clans as though it were second nature. Her eyes flashed with a quiet confidence whenever they met Jon's. He did not know if she ever felt the same weight he did at night, though he suspected she might. Before long, others arrived. Karsa of the Iceborn, her braided hair stiff with frost, axes slung at her belt. Reik the Swift, who led a band of agile scouts that roamed the northern foothills. Hela Stonefist, a middle-aged woman with knotted muscles who oversaw Steamfall's smithy. A half-dozen more filed in, representing the varied tapestry of the free folk. They settled around the largest table, their breath misting in the chill interior, though the fires crackled in wall-mounted braziers. The resulting warmth was meager but welcome. In the hush that followed, all eyes turned to John. He swallowed, then stood. "We have word of newcomers approaching from the west. Reports say they're around 30 strong, possibly more. They carry their wounded and children with them, which suggests they're not a raiding party." He paused to gauge their reactions. "But we know there are still scattered bandits in the region, so we can't be complacent." Karsa folded her muscular arms. "We should send a patrol to intercept them, see who they are, what they want." "Aye," Tormund said, scratching his beard. "Better to greet them on our terms than let them wander in on their own. Might be half of them are trouble." "Nay," Val spoke up. "We should also prepare shelter if they come in peace. Winter might ease, but it's never easy out there. If they're refugees, we'll see them cared for." That last remark drew a bit of side-eye from Karsadot. "We can't feed the whole North, Val." John lifted a hand in a calming gesture. "We feed who we can. We're free folk. If they're free folk too, we offer them a place, if they'll respect our ways." Karsa grunted but did not argue further. Rick cleared his throat. "I'll lead the scouts myself. I know the trails. We'll find these travelers, bring them here if they're worth it. Otherwise, we'll show them a different path and make it clear we don't need thieves or raiders." "Now," John nodded. "Good. Take a small party in case they're hostile. Let them see we're not easy prey. Just remember, we're not looking for a fight unless they give us no choice." A general murmur of assent passed through the council. The next topic was an update on the farmland expansions near the southwestern edge of the valley. Hella Stonefist recounted how the new channels Val devised were carrying hot spring water to frost-hardened soil. The result? A small yield of hardy tubers even in the colder months. This was a miraculous development for the free folk, who rarely relied on any agriculture beyond the simplest foraging. Some bristled at the notion, accustomed to living as hunters rather than planters, but many, especially families with small children, saw the value in a secure food source. The plan was to expand these channels, dig them deeper, and see if they could support more farmland in the next growing cycle. John gave his approval, encouraging the council to pool resources and labor. Talk turned to watchtower repairs, the forging of arrowheads, the distribution of furs for the next winter. The discussion felt both tedious and necessary, another sign that they were building a realm. Not in the sense of lords and bannermen, but a communal union of clans. The meeting lasted over an hour, and by its conclusion, the hall had filled with the quiet bustle of daily life. Craftsmen wandered in, looking for supplies or conversation. Mothers with children stood by the fires chasing off the morning chill. As the council members dispersed, John lingered, leaning on the edge of the table. He was tired in a bone-deep way that went beyond sleeplessness. Tormund slapped him on the back and departed, probably to check on the day's hunts. Karsa strode out, axes swinging at her hips. Rick left to gather his scouts. Val remained, pausing to glance at John from across the table. "You seem distant," she remarked, stepping closer. "More than usual." John offered a faint smile. "There's always something to brood over." "So brood with a plan," she said gently, crossing her arms over her fur-lined vest. "You can't carry everything on your own. That's the point of the council." He appreciated her concern, though he had no immediate words to reassure her. Instead, he managed a nod. She gave his forearm a light squeeze, then excused herself to see about the farmland. Left alone, John ran a hand through his hair, remembering a time when he had less of it. Before the war, before the ravages of life beyond the wall. He turned to Ghost, who stood at his side, silent and watchful. Sometimes John felt that Ghost was the only one who truly saw every bruise he carried within. The direwolf's unwavering loyalty comforted him in ways words could not. Stepping outside, John blinked in the mid-morning glare. The sky had brightened, though dark clouds gathered to the northeast. The ever-present steam coiled among huts, rising from vents in the earth. He strolled through the winding pathways that snaked between dwellings, greeting folk as they passed. An old man hammered at a broken cartwheel while two children offered encouragement. A cluster of younger warriors practiced with wooden spears. Over by one of the forges, a smith's apprentice pumped bellows to heat the coals. Everywhere John saw some measure of life thriving. It helped ease the shadowed corners of his thoughts. His feet carried him toward the settlement's northern edge, where the terrain sloped upward into a series of ridges. A low fence marked the boundary, and beyond it, a narrow footpath climbed to a vantage point that overlooked the valley. He felt drawn to that spot, whenever doubts pressed too heavily on his mind. Ghost padded close, as always. At the fence, two guards recognized John and unlatched the gate, letting him pass. One of them, a tall youth named Carrot, to which Tormund joked it was because his hair was as orange as a carrot's flesh, murmured, "Watch your step, my king. The path's icy this morning." "Thank you," John said, uneasy even now at the word king. But the youth said it with a genuine smile. John ascended the trail, carefully placing his boots so as not to lose footing on the slick rock. The wind picked up, carrying a chill that stung his cheeks. By the time he reached the top of the ridge, his breath puffed in labored clouds. Ghost arrived alongside him, unbothered by the climb. From this vantage, Steamfall stretched below in a sprawl of huts and small stone structures. Thin trails of smoke drifted up from each dwelling, merging into a hazy canopy. The central hall dominated the cluster, near the largest hot spring that vented steady clouds of steam. Smaller outposts spread outward, connected by newly forged roads or footpaths. Beyond the city proper lay farmland, ringed by makeshift irrigation channels. Off in the distance, near the southwestern corner, he could see new fences going up, lines of movement where laborers cleared the soil for crops. The scale of it still surprised him. Once, the free folk were a scattered people. Then Mance Rayder united them briefly before the tragedies of Hardhome and the invasion of the White Walkers. Now, Jon had led them here, forging not just a camp, but a city. A kingdom, in all but name. They called him King Beyond the Wall, but if that was so, then this was his seat. Steamfall, the heart of a realm that dared to exist in defiance of everything that had tried to kill them. It was a testament to survival, shaped by the illusions of civilization. Watchtowers, farmland, a council. And yet, in the swirl of daily tasks, Jon recognized how precarious it all was. One particularly harsh winter, a sudden epidemic, an attack by a large enough force, any calamity might topple them. Yet the free folk persevered. They always had. His mind drifted south, beyond the invisible horizon. Winterfell. The Wall. The Gift. The Night's Watch. Sansa, Bran, Arya. He wondered if they were well. Rumors from roving traders painted a picture of relative stability under the new monarchy in King's Landing, with the great houses bent on reconstruction. Time had marched on since the Great War. New disputes had arisen in the south, less cataclysmic than the war against the dead, but perhaps more typical of the Seven Kingdoms politics. Jon felt strangely detached from it all, as though that part of him had died the day he rode north for the last time, leaving duty to the realm behind. The realm he served now was one the Southerners barely acknowledged, or if they did, they likely preferred to forget it existed. He recalled the vow he'd made, to protect the free folk, to give them a life beyond the threat of extermination. So far, they thrived. But that meant forging alliances, ensuring that the Watch did not grow paranoid about the wildling kingdom beyond the Wall. It meant dealing with each clan that arrived in Steamfall, some bearing old grudges, some carrying secrets that might upend the fragile balance. The longer they thrived, the more likely the South would take notice. And then what? Another war? A new wave of refugees? Jon set his jaw. No, he wouldn't let it come to that without a fight. He gazed up at the sky, where the clouds shifted in a pale haze. Ghost whined softly, picking up on his mood. Jon laid a hand on the direwolf's thick fur. "It's all right," he murmured, unsure if he meant it as reassurance or a hollow promise. After a time he turned back toward the path, descending to rejoin the life below. Over the next few days, life proceeded much as it usually did. Steamfall's daily rhythms went on, hunting, forging, farming, trading. Folk who disliked the bustle of the growing settlement took to building small hamlets deeper in the valley, returning intermittently for supplies or to trade. Jon oversaw militia drills, taught basic swordplay to those eager to learn. He found himself placing more trust in the council, letting them handle minor disputes. This freed him to focus on broader matters, the settlement's expansion, the perimeter, diplomatic overtures to scattered clans, the occasional rumor of a threat lurking in the mountains. On the fourth day after the council, Reich returned with his scouting party, and they brought the newcomers with them. Jon saw their approach from the vantage of Steamfall's gate, a group of around 40 men, women, and children trudging through the swirling mist. Most appeared tired and lean, dressed in patchwork furs. Their leader, a woman perhaps in her early 30s, strode at the front, a battered longsword strapped to her back. One of her arms hung in a sling, hinting at a recent injury. Rick approached Jon with a short bow of greeting. "They're led by Hareth," Reich said, gesturing to the woman. "She says they come from far west, near the frozen shore. Their village was destroyed by raiders. They ask for refuge." Jon stepped forward. "I'm Jon Snow, the one these folk here have named their king." He tried to keep his tone cordial, though he saw how the woman's eyes hardened at the word king. She gave a cursory dip of her head. "Hareth of the Stormcrows, once of the frozen shore," she said. "We were attacked by black-sailed pirates. Had to flee inland. Lost too many along the way. Some turned back south, hoping to find easier land. We heard rumors of a new city here in the north, a place that welcomes free folk." "Nah, sure." Jon regarded them. A boy clung to Hareth's side, wide-eyed and shivering. Another cluster of battered survivors looked around warily, as though expecting an ambush. Ghost prowled at Jon's flank, a pale ghost indeed, which drew a mix of awe and fear from Harith's people. "We do welcome free folk," John said. "But we have rules here. You can't just steal from your neighbors or kill them for an old feud. We've learned that if we're to survive in this valley, we must stand together." Nah. Harith's eyes flicked across the settlement. The ring of watchers at the gate, Tormund's looming figure near the rampart, the faint clang of a smithy behind them. "I see you've built a bigger clan than any I've known," she said, voice cautious. "But a clan's a clan. If you'll take us, we'll work. We've little left, but we have strong arms, we can fish, we can hunt. We'll follow your way so long as we're free." John nodded. "That's all we ask." He motioned for Val, who was approaching with a handful of other settlement leaders, to join them. "We'll set aside a spot for you to build shelter. We'll trade what we can for furs or metal, help your wounded, but know this, no one clan can stand alone out here, so we share resources and we share chores. If that sounds fair, we can talk further." Harith hesitated. A flicker of bitterness crossed her features. Perhaps she resented the idea of trusting a man once sworn to the Night's Watch. But she relented. "It does. We're too few to survive alone anyway." She turned, gesturing to her exhausted band. "We'll do our part." Thus began the process of integrating a new clan. Val coordinated with them on shelter space. Hela Stonefist offered to examine Harith's arm, applying a paste made from local herbs to reduce infection. Tormund volunteered to show them around Steamfall. John watched from a distance, ensuring that no immediate disputes erupted. The free folk had grown accustomed to arrivals, and many extended kindness. A few eyed them suspiciously, especially those who had known trouble with the frozen shore. But for the most part, the Storm Crows were accepted. They pitched tents near the western side of the settlement while working on more solid huts. Over time, they would mingle with the rest. That night, the settlement offered a modest welcome feast for the newcomers. Several goats had been hunted earlier in the week, and mead from the last fermentation was rationed out. Flickering torches lit an open area near the central hall. Drums pounded a steady rhythm, accompanied by pipes. Children ran between the adults, laughter echoing in the chilly air. Ghost lay near John's feet as he stood with Tormund and Val, surveying the rowdy gathering. Harith approached, an awkward hesitation in her step. Her arm was tightly bound, limiting movement. "Good feast," she said, voice low enough not to disturb the dancing free folk swirling past. "Too good, maybe. After so much hunger, it feels strange." John gestured at the half-empty horn of mead in her hand. "Take the chance to rest. You're among friends now." "Friends," she echoed. "If you'll have it so." She studied John's face, as though searching for deception. "They say you were once a crow, a sworn brother of the Night's Watch. Is it true?" He inclined his head. "It is. Long ago, things change." "Aye." She glanced at Ghost. "They say you also fought with the free folk against the dead. Then you fought a dragon queen, or for her, or rumors swirl. But here you are, wearing a crown of sorts, forging a city in the wilderness. Did you ever think your life would lead you here?" John allowed a small huff of breath, something akin to dry amusement. "No, I. But I don't regret it." "Nah." Harith seemed to weigh that. "Then let's hope we don't regret following you. Thank you for the welcome." She lifted her horn in a brief salute, then turned to rejoin her clan. John watched her go. Each new arrival carried their own scars, their own complexities. But if they were willing to adapt, they would find a home here. If not, they'd learn quickly that Steamfall was no easy haven. As the evening wore on, music and drink loosened the tension among old and new inhabitants alike. John lingered at the edges, accepting greetings but rarely seeking conversation. Tormund tried to drag him into a dance at one point, which John politely refused. Laughter rippled around them. The free folk might have once ridiculed the notion of kings and thrones, but they appreciated a figure who had proven his worth by blade and by deed. John was their reluctant center of gravity, a role he never sought yet could not forsake. Eventually, he retired to his hut, Ghost padding behind. Long after the drums and the singing died away, he lay awake, thoughts drifting back to the uneasy question, how long could this peace last? He listened to the distant hush of wind, to the occasional cry from someone still reveling, and eventually drifted into a fitful slumber. In the weeks that followed, Harith's clan integrated further. The Storm Crows had capable fishermen among them who set about crafting small coracles to fish the deeper stretches of the river. A few of their archers joined Tormund's hunts, bringing back game. Harith, forced to rest her arm, spent time near the forges and farmland, learning the settlement's methods. While some free folk were suspicious of her, she seemed determined to prove the Stormcrows could be an asset. Jon noted her progress from a distance, satisfied that his earlier conversation seemed genuine. One crisp morning, a new matter demanded Jon's attention. A messenger from Eastwatch by the Sea arrived at the outskirts of Steamfall. A single figure dressed in black, riding a weary horse, escorted by 2 of Tormund's scouts. The news swept through the settlement like a sudden breeze. Jon stood by the main gate, heart pounding, as the watchers brought forth a slight, pale youth of perhaps 19 or 20, clad in a patchwork of black furs that marked him as a brother of the Night's Watch, though the uniform was less formal than it once might have been. The youth dismounted, looking around with nervous wonder at the cluster of free folk. Jon stepped forward, meeting him eye to eye. "I'm Jon Snow," he said. "Formerly of the Night's Watch. Why are you here?" The youth swallowed hard. "My name is Alan Pike, my lord. Sent by Lord Commander Riot. He has a message for the king beyond the wall." Norn. Jon tensed at the mention of Riot. He knew that name well enough. The new Lord Commander, notoriously mistrustful of wildlings. "Speak then," Jon said, keeping his tone measured. He noticed how Tormund hovered at his side, posture taut as a bowstring. Alan took a breath. "Lord Commander Riot requests a meeting. He says tensions are mounting in the Gift. Some wildlings have crossed south in small groups, stirring trouble with local farmers. There have been violent clashes. The Night's Watch cannot maintain order on its own. He proposes talks. Says you're the only one who might keep the free folk from stirring up a new war." Natan. A silence hung in the air. The watchers at the gate exchanged wary glances. Tormund let out a low grunt. "And he's decided to come ask for help from the man he once called a traitor to the Watch?" Jon's jaw tightened. Memories flickered through his mind, how the Watch had turned on him for letting the free folk through the gates, how he'd been stabbed in the cold dark. "When does he want this meeting?" Jon asked the messenger. Alan cleared his throat. "As soon as you can. He suggests a neutral ground south of the wall, near Queensgate. He'll bring a handful of black brothers. You bring a handful of your people. We talk." Nazil. Jon considered. This was unexpected. Riot, of all people, wanting to negotiate. Then again, the Night's Watch was a shell of its former strength. Perhaps they realized if the free folk truly united in crossing the wall, the Watch could do little to stop them. And the Lords of the Gift might be pressuring the Watch for solutions. "Tell me," Jon said quietly. "Did Lord Commander Riot forbid you to speak of anything else?" Alan blinked. "I was only told to deliver the message, but I'll answer any questions if I can, my lord." Jon studied the young man. He didn't look like a liar, only a pawn in a game he scarcely understood. "How are conditions at Eastwatch?" Jon asked. "How many men remain in black?" Alan shifted uncomfortably. A few dozen, maybe? We keep watch, but the castles along the wall are abandoned except for a handful. Castle Black, Eastwatch, Shadow Tower. There aren't enough rangers to patrol everything. The Gift is in turmoil. Settlers from the south clash with wildlings who slip across in small groups. We've had raids on storehouses. Farmers are up in arms. The Watch is caught in the middle. Jon nodded. That matched the rumors. He exchanged a glance with Tormund. "Return to your commander," Jon said to Alan. "Tell him we'll meet him in 2 weeks' time near Queensgate as he requested. We'll arrive with a small party. I expect him to do the same." Alan exhaled, relief flooding his face. "Thank you, my lord. I'll ride at once." He hesitated, gaze darting to the swirling steam that rose between huts. "This place, it's much larger than I expected. I didn't know so many wildlings could live together without fighting." Horror. A trace of a smile tugged at Jon's lips. "The free folk can do many things the Night's Watch never believe." Alan nodded, mounted his horse, and with a final bow, he departed. Jon watched him go, feeling the tension coiled in his chest. This was a development he hadn't predicted. The watch and the gift were uneasy neighbors, but it was the first time Riot had ever asked for Joan's help. Or, indeed, acknowledged him beyond the occasional threat. Tormund turned to him, expression grim. "This smells of trouble." "Likely," Jon agreed. "But if it prevents bloodshed, it's worth trying." Within the hour, word spread through Steamfall. The Night's Watch wanted talks. Some found it laughable, others suspicious, still others curious. The council convened that afternoon. They gathered in the great hall, the table crowded with voices. Tormund insisted it was a trick. Karsa recommended ignoring the watch entirely. Harith pointed out that the watch still controlled passage south for large groups, which could prove a headache if conflict escalated. Val suggested that hearing them out might open trade, or at least reduce friction. Jon listened, weighing each argument, and ultimately decided to go. "We cannot ignore them," he said, hands resting on the table. "If Riot is truly open to negotiation, maybe we can set borders that keep the gift safe from raids and keep the watch off our backs. The fewer enemies we make, the better." He paused, letting his gaze sweep over them. "I'll go in 2 weeks' time with a small escort. Tormund, Karsa, Valid like you with me. Any who'd prefer to remain behind, do so." Karsa bristled. "They might kill you and mount your head on a pike." "Then we'll stay vigilant." Jon's tone hardened. "We won't walk blind into a trap, but we'll go." A murmur spread around the table, grudging acceptance. The council nodded. So it was settled. Preparations began at once, forging details of how many would travel, what route they'd take, who would lead Steamfall in Jon's absence. An older warrior named Styr would watch over the settlement, working with Hela Stonefist to maintain order. The next 2 weeks passed in a rush of finalizing the farmland expansions, ensuring resources were in place, and picking a handful of skilled fighters to accompany Jon. Harith volunteered, but Jon asked her to remain behind. He wanted someone else who'd live by the sea to keep watch on any new arrivals from the frozen shore. She agreed reluctantly. Tormund spent the time boasting that if the crows tried any betrayal, the free folk would paint the ice with black blood. Karsa sharpened her axes with stoic determination. Val readied supplies for the journey, quietly reminding Jon that they should not appear desperate or too eager, her sense of free folk pride shining through. Meanwhile, rumors spread that some among the settlement opposed any meeting at all. A few self-styled zealots insisted the free folk should never treat with crows. Jon quelled their protests with calm explanations, though he remained aware that he was walking a thin line. At last, the day of departure arrived. The chosen party assembled at the northern gate, 10 in total. Jon, Tormund, Karsa, Val, and 6 seasoned warriors. They would take 3 hardy horses to carry supplies, though most traveled on foot. Ghost, of course, would accompany Jon. The morning was cold but clear, a welcome respite from the typical gloom. Dozens of onlookers gathered to see them off, some uncertain, others wishing them success. Jon exchanged words with Hela Stonefist, who promised to keep order. Harith of the Stormcrows gave him a curt nod, her expression unreadable. Rick looked anxious, as though expecting trouble. Jon buckled his fur cloak tighter, feeling the black iron crown wrapped in cloth in his saddlebag. He rarely wore the crown, but he supposed it might be necessary at the meeting. If Riot wanted to address a king, he would see one, whether he liked it or not. Tormund pointed to the horizon. "Let's get on with it then." They set out, the guards at the gate swinging the heavy doors aside. Immediately the open wilderness enveloped them, crisp wind biting at exposed skin. Steamfall receded behind them as they trudged into the rolling hills. The path would lead them eastward around the mountainous region, then south to the wall of ice that once loomed so large in Jon's life. Memories fluttered in his mind of patrolling that very ice, of standing guard at Castle Black. How different it felt now, traveling in the opposite direction, returning not as a brother in black, but as a king of the free folk. The first few days were uneventful. The group made camp each evening in natural hollows, sheltering from the wind. Karsa set traps for small game, bringing in hare or snow grouse. Tormund regaled them with old stories, Val occasionally rolling her eyes at his tall tales. Ghost roamed the perimeter at night, silent as a wraith. On the second day, they encountered a pair of traveling bards heading north to Steamfall, free folk who had heard of the new city's gatherings. They chatted briefly, sharing gossip from the south. Tormund insisted the bards amuse them with a bawdy tune around the fire that night, to which the bards eagerly agreed. On the third day, storm clouds gathered, forcing them to press on more quickly. They skirted a half-frozen river, its banks strewn with broken ice floes. Once, they spotted a solitary figure in the distance, trudging westward, but the traveler vanished behind a ridge before they could hail him. The mountains around them cast long shadows in the afternoon light, reminding Jon of the shifting terrain that had always defined the lands beyond the wall. The route grew steeper, passing through ravines dotted with pine. The moan of the wind among the cliffs echoed in unsettling ways. More than once, Tormund cursed the rough footing. Karsa, by contrast, seemed in her element, leaping from rock to rock with the grace of a predator. Val followed with determined focus, her breath puffing in the cold air. By the end of the fourth day, they emerged onto a flatter expanse that sloped downward toward the south. Far in the distance, just visible through the swirling snow, rose the wall, a pale line against the horizon. Jon felt his chest tighten. It had been years since he'd stood beneath that ancient barrier. Even from miles away, its sheer immensity was apparent. Memories welled up, his early days as a new recruit, standing on top of the wall, the punishing wind in his face. He exhaled slowly. They camped that night in the lee of a rocky outcrop. Tormund built a fire, feeding it with scavenged wood and dried dung. The flicker of flames cast dancing shadows on the rock walls. Karsa stood sentry, scanning the darkness for threats. Val crouched beside Jon, unrolling a small map they'd brought. According to the messenger, Queensgate is a short ride from the base of the wall. We can be there by midday tomorrow, she said, pointing at a rough sketch of the area. Jon nodded, remembering the route. The old castle known as Queensgate was a lesser-used fortress of the Night's Watch, east of Castle Black but west of Eastwatch. We should approach carefully, Jon said. Riot might already have men in place. Val agreed. We'll keep our eyes open. The others trust you to handle the negotiations, but we'll be ready if it's a trap. Her expression remained calm, but Jon saw the tension in her posture. She carried a long knife at her belt, a quiver of arrows on her back. She was no stranger to conflict, nor was she shy about it. Jon huddled in his cloak as the wind howled. Ghost lay at his side, warmth radiating from the direwolf's thick fur. Tormund shared strips of dried meat, and they ate in silence. Now that the wall was in sight, each of them was lost in thought. The sense of crossing into uncertain territory weighed on them all. The next morning, they broke camp early, the last of the night's chill biting at their fingers. As they traveled south, the wall loomed ever larger, a vertical monolith of ice that stretched across the entire horizon. Even in partial sunlight, it exuded an otherworldly gleam, as if it had a life of its own. Jon remembered how it looked in moonlight, how the swirl of stars overhead reflected in its glassy surface. He also remembered the White Walkers breaching it, the terror of the living cowering behind failing defenses. Too many ghosts lingered here. They crossed the last few miles cautiously. The terrain flattened into tundra-like plains dotted with patches of scrub. The wind had calmed, leaving a hush that felt ominous. At last, they saw a cluster of ruins that might have once been a village. Jon recognized it as an old wildling camp, long abandoned. The remains of huts jutted from drifts of snow. Off to the side, near the foot of a shallow hill, stood a small stone structure that looked new, perhaps built by the Night's Watch or by local settlers. Smoke curled from its chimney. That was likely Queensgate, or near enough to it. Jon signaled the group to halt. They dismounted or stood still, scanning the surroundings. No obvious watchers. We approach slowly, Jon said. Keep your weapons sheathed, but stay alert. They had advanced in a loose formation. Closer now, Jon saw that the structure was a fortified lodge of sorts, ringed by a low palisade. A black banner hung listlessly by the entrance, no sigil, just the black of the watch. Tormund muttered curses under his breath, as if the sight alone offended him. Karsa's mouth twitched with tension. Val gripped her bow but kept the string loose. Ghost trotted at Jon's side, ears up. A horn blast sounded from within the palisade, a low mournful note. Then the gate swung open, revealing a figure in black furs, tall, middle-aged, with a stern face partly obscured by a graying beard. Soldiers in black lined the entry, perhaps a dozen in total. They carried spears or crossbows, though none were raised in immediate threat. John recognized the tall figure as Riot, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. John had never known him well in the old days, but he recalled Riot's disapproval of letting wildlings cross the wall. It seemed time had changed many things. John dismounted, then took a few steps forward. Behind him, Tormund and Val flanked him, Karsa and the others forming a cautious line. Riot stepped out from the gate, meeting John halfway. His gaze flicked to Tormund, to Karsa's axes, to Ghost, and then back to John. "Jon Snow," Riot said, voice rough like gravel. "King beyond the wall, they say." John inclined his head, deciding not to deny it. "Lord Commander Riot, you asked for this meeting, we're here." Riot's jaw tightened, as though it pained him to do this. "Hey, we have much to discuss, but first let's see your men stow their weapons in the rack there." He gestured to a crude rack by the gate, where a few crossbows sat. "We'll do the same. We'll talk inside." Tormund's eyes flared. "You want us to give up our steel? Ha! That's a fine jest. John raised a hand, silencing Tormund's outburst. "We'll keep our blades sheathed, but we won't be disarming entirely. The free folk don't part from their weapons lightly." Riot's lips thinned. "Then you'll have to trust we won't do the same. We can't talk properly while glaring down each other's crossbows." Karsa snorted. "We never trust crows." A tension crackled between them. John weighed the options. If he insisted they keep their weapons, this meeting might never move beyond the threshold. But disarming entirely felt foolish. He opted for a compromise. "We'll place our larger weapons on the racks," he said, resting a hand on Longclaw's pommel. "But we keep our sidearms. That goes for you as well. We all keep our sidearms. Anything else can wait outside." Riot studied him for a tense moment, then gave a curt nod. "Agreed." John signaled Tormund, Karsa, and the others. With visible reluctance, Tormund placed his great axe on the rack. Karsa unstrapped her 2 large axes, though she kept a smaller hatchet at her belt. The warriors of the Watch followed suit, stacking crossbows and heavier blades. It was a curious display of forced trust. Ghost remained beside John, hackles only slightly raised. Riot gestured toward the lodge. "Inside, you'll find a warm hearth. Let's talk like men, not beasts." He turned and walked back through the gate. Joan's party followed, passing between rows of black-clad watchers whose faces betrayed a range of emotions: suspicion, fear, curiosity. Some recognized Tormund's fiery beard or Joan's face, though none spoke. Inside the palisade, the structure was sturdier than it looked from a distance, a thick-walled building with shuttered windows. The clang of a blacksmith's hammer sounded from a small shed out back. Smoke curled from the chimney overhead. Entering, they found a dim hall with a long table and a stone fireplace along one side. Lanterns hung from the rafters, their glow flickering across battered shields and old banners. The air smelled of stew, ashes, and damp wool. A handful of chairs surrounded the table, enough for both parties. Riot took a seat at the head, motioning for John to sit opposite. Tormund settled on John's right, Val on his left. Karsa and the others stood behind, while the Watch Rangers filled in around Riot. The tension in the room was palpable. Ghost positioned himself near John's chair, glaring at anyone who drew too close. Riot cleared his throat. "Thank you for coming, Snow. I know we've had our differences, but the Night's Watch faces a difficult time." He paused, folding his hands on the table. "You know as well as anyone that our numbers are few. The realm south of the wall is in disarray. Many of the High Lords who once sent supplies and men to the Watch have turned their attention elsewhere. We're left to guard the gift with scraps. Meanwhile, we have an influx of wildlings sneaking across, some in small bands, some in larger groups. There have been raids, burnings, enough that local farmers cry for protection." John listened carefully. "And you think these wildlings come from Steamfall?" Riot's gaze flicked over Tormund and the others. "I'm not certain. Could be. Or they might be smaller clans who want no part of your new city. Maybe they resent southern rule. But farmers who lose their flocks and children who vanish in the night don't care about the difference. They only see wildlings, and they blame the Watch for failing to keep them out." Oh no. Tormund scoffed. So the crows want us to do your job for you? Patch your holes in the wall? Even I know that's madness. Riot bristled. It's not about patching holes. The wall stands, for now. It's about controlling the flood of free folk who cross in the shadows. We can't man every crossing anymore. We can't chase every raider. So I come to you, the so-called king beyond the wall, because perhaps you can keep your people in line. Karsa snarled. We're not dogs to be kept in line. Jon placed a hand on the table, palm down. Enough. Let's speak plainly. You want to stop the raids. We don't condone them, but we can't be everywhere either. Many wildlings prefer living free, traveling where they wish. We're forging a new home north of the wall so our people don't need to risk crossing south. But some still do. We have no authority over those who won't listen. Riot frowned. That's why we're offering a proposal. If you can persuade the majority of free folk to remain north, within your so-called kingdom, then perhaps the Watch can reduce the threat we pose to you. Let your people settle beyond the wall. The Watch won't come meddling. We'll even consider small trading outposts for furs, meat, or the like if that helps. In exchange, you do your best to prevent raids into the gift. Anyone who tries, you call them criminals and you handle them. If the raids cease, the farmers calm down, and we don't have to start sending more men to kill wildlings. Wing. Tormund shot Jon a surprised look. That's quite an offer from a crow. You're basically acknowledging Jon's realm in the north. Riot lifted his chin. We prefer not to, but times change. The Watch has bigger worries than old grudges. If the free folk are building a home up there, maybe it's best to let them do so, as long as they don't threaten the southern realms. Jon felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Part of him bristled at the Watch's assumption of authority, at the notion that they could bestow or withhold permission. Yet he also saw the value in an understanding. If the Watch recognized Steamfall as a legitimate settlement, if they refrained from attacking or harassing free folk near the wall, that could mean peace. Well, we can try, he said slowly. But the free folk won't react well to being told where they can roam. Riot's eyes narrowed. Then give them reason to stay. The gift has grown stronger in recent years. More settlers, more farmland. They won't take kindly to raids. Blood will flow. If your free folk want to avoid that, they should remain in your domain or trade honestly. Val spoke up softly, her voice measured. Trade is possible. We have goods, furs, hides, crafted tools. We'd gladly exchange them for grain, metal, salt. Neo is see well. Riot nodded, though he still looked as if he tasted something sour. That might work, if we establish a neutral point near the wall for these exchanges. We keep it under watch, you keep your side peaceful. Tormund let out a quiet grunt. Hey, not a bad idea. If we can keep the crows from cheating us. Riot gave him a flat look. We're not criminals. We want stability, that's all. Karsa scowled, arms folded. And if some wildlings cross anyway? Steal sheep, kill a farmer? Will you blame Jon Snow's entire settlement? Nail, Wendatrups. That depends on your reaction, Riot said grimly. If you turn a blind eye, the farmers will want vengeance. But if you help us bring the raiders to justice, well, we might avoid a full-scale conflict. Silence settled over the table. Jon recognized the precarious nature of this arrangement. They were essentially forging an informal treaty. The Watch would allow Steamfall to exist unchallenged, in exchange for controlling wildling raids. But the free folk were proud and might resent the notion of policing their own for the Watch's sake. Still, if the alternative was renewed war, we need to discuss details, Jon said. We can't agree to a blank promise, but the idea of trade, of reduced hostility, is worth exploring. Riot sighed as though exhausted. Then let's explore it. We can draw up a few conditions, present them to your people, see if they'll abide. If they do, maybe the gift can find peace. Tormund shot Jon a glance. We'll abide by nothing if it demands we kneel. We're not asking for kneeling, Riot retorted. Just an agreement. So they began the tedious process of hashing out terms, with Tormund sniping at perceived insults, Karsa glaring daggers at any approach that seemed too favorable to the Watch, and Val offering calm suggestions about how to structure trade. Riot's men, for the most part, stood in guarded silence, though one or two ventured practical remarks about route security, or the need to avoid infiltration. The hours wore on. They broke for a shared meal, stew ladled out by a grim-faced cook. Even that was fraught with tension, the Free Folk and the Black Brothers eyeing each other as they ate. By late afternoon they had a rudimentary framework. Steamfall would discourage raids south of the wall, seeking out or banishing any clans who insisted on crossing with hostile intent. The Watch in turn would not lead large-scale attacks north of the wall, nor would they interfere with Steamfall's expansion as long as it remained north. Both sides would establish a small trading post near Queensgate, where goods could be exchanged periodically, with minimal armed presence. It was not a formal contract in the legal sense. No lords were stamping wax seals, but it was an understanding, a handshake agreement forged in exhaustion. Whether it would hold depended on good faith. When the final terms were summarized, Riot and John met each other's gaze across the table. Riot rubbed his temples as though fighting a headache. "So be it," he said. "We can't force a better deal, and maybe we'll see fewer widows in the gift this way." John folded his arms. "Fewer widows in the north, too." They rose. Tormund and Karsa retrieved their heavier weapons from the rack, while the Watch Rangers watched warily. No one attacked, though the tension hovered like a thundercloud. Riot led them outside into the cold light. The wall towered in the distance, casting an afternoon shadow. John turned to Riot. "There's one more thing. Some time ago, I sent word through the Watch to Winterfell, to my family. Did that message ever reach them?" Riot shook his head. "Not that I know of. Messages come and go, but we're short of ravens. It's possible it was lost. If you want to send another, we can try." "No." John hesitated. "Perhaps. I'll consider it." An odd tightness filled his chest. The prospect of renewing contact with his siblings was both comforting and daunting. So much had changed. Riot cleared his throat. "You fought bravely during the war, Snow. I remember the tales. Let's hope we don't face another threat like that. The Watch is in no state to defend the realm from an ancient evil." John thought of the White Walkers, the endless night. He nodded gravely. "We all hope that. Farewell, Lord Commander." They exchanged a final tense nod. Joan's party left the palisade, rejoining their horses. The Watchers in black parted, some with relief, some with lingering distrust. John felt the tension in his own limbs, as though expecting a crossbow bolt in his back at any moment. But none came. They remounted, guiding their small train northward again. Tormund let out a deep breath. "Well, that was a barrel of laughs," he said sarcastically. "You really think the Crows will keep their word?" John grimaced. "I don't know, but if we can avert open bloodshed, it's a start." Karsa's eyes flashed. "I don't like it. We promised them too much." Val countered gently, "Better a hard peace than an easy war, if it spares innocent lives." Karsa snorted, but did not retort. The group fell into a steady plod across the snowy plains. With the business concluded, they planned to circle east before heading north, avoiding the rougher slopes. The sky overhead darkened to a bruise-colored dusk, the wind picking up. They made camp near a natural limestone outcropping that formed a partial cave. Inside, the air was still cold, but at least they had some protection from the wind. They lit a small fire, passing around dried provisions. After they'd eaten, Karsa removed her boots to massage her sore feet. Tormund drank a long gulp from his skin of ale, and Val busied herself organizing their supplies. John sat near the cave mouth, arms draped over his knees. Ghost pressed close, the direwolf's warmth a comfort against the chill. John stared out at the swirling snow and the dim silhouette of the wall far off. He wondered if this fragile treaty would hold, or if the real test had yet to come. His thoughts drifted, unmoored. He imagined a day when Steamfall might flourish into something more, an actual city, with trade routes, caravans, farmland, even forms of art and culture. And perhaps the free folk would no longer be considered savage raiders by those in the south, but recognized as an independent people with their own ways. That was a lofty dream, one that might never be realized. But as he listened to Tormund's soft snores, as he felt ghosts even breathing, as he recalled the vow he had made to protect these people, John found enough hope to keep going. They returned to Steamfall after another week's journey, battered by a fierce storm that forced them to shelter for 2 days beneath an overhang. When at last they crested the familiar ridge that overlooked the valley, Relief washed through them all. Smoke rose from countless chimneys, torches dotted the perimeter fences, and the silhouette of that half-finished watchtower loomed larger than before. Steam curled from the hot springs, forming drifting clouds in the crisp air. Even at a distance, the city was alive with activity, proof that it endured, a beacon of life in an unforgiving land. News of the meeting spread quickly. The council convened to hear John's report. Tormund, Karsa, and Val added details from their perspectives. Reactions were mixed. Some saw potential for trade and fewer raids. Others bristled at any agreement with the Watch, calling it an affront to free folk independence. John listened to every viewpoint, letting them vent. At last he stood at the head of the table, long shadows cast by the firelight. "I won't force this on anyone," John said. "We're free folk, and you can do as you wish. But if this arrangement means an end to constant skirmishes near the wall, if it means the Watch won't come north to burn our homes, then perhaps it's worth trying. We'll set up the trade post near Queensgate in a few weeks. If you'd like to send goods, do so. If you choose not to trade with crows, then don't." Wow. The council murmured among themselves. Some nodded in agreement, others glowered in silence. Hela Stonefist pointed out that stable trade routes might bring in more grain or metal, which would help them through harsher winters. Harith, arms crossed, admitted that relying solely on the valley's resources was risky. The memory of the frozen shore's devastation weighed on her. Ultimately, the council agreed to attempt the arrangement, with the understanding that it was not a surrender but a pragmatic step. Karsa seemed uneasy, but did not mount any further challenge. Afterward, John wandered the settlement, inspecting the farmland expansions and the newly raised huts. He was heartened to see that progress continued in his absence. The free folk had constructed another ring of irrigation channels, and the farmers, once purely hunters, were learning to plant root vegetables and hardy grains. Children ran between the rows, squealing with delight whenever warm water seeped up from the channels. A group of older men and women taught them how to keep the channels clear of debris. It was a sight John never would have imagined years ago. Wildlings farming. Yet necessity bred invention, and the wildlings had proven themselves adaptable. In the weeks that followed, Steamfall bustled with preparations. Word spread through the valley that anyone who wished to trade with the Night's Watch should gather their goods. A committee formed to manage the exchange: Val, Tormund, Harith, and 2 others. They pored over lists of furs, hides, carved bone trinkets, baskets of dried fish, lumps of raw ore scavenged from the mountains. In return, they hoped to acquire grain, salt, metal tools, and perhaps a few stores of wine or meat. It was an ambitious plan, the first real attempt at structured commerce between the free folk and the Watch since anyone could remember. Some scorned the idea, but a surprising number were eager. Bartering with crows was an odd notion, but if it brought tangible benefits, it might be worth setting aside old grudges. John supervised from a distance, ensuring the settlement remained secure. He organized extra patrols, anticipating that not everyone beyond the wall would favor this new cooperation. If roving clans heard of the agreement, they might try to sabotage it. Meanwhile, he caught glimpses of tension among his people. Some fumed that the free folk should remain truly free, crossing the wall whenever they pleased. Others argued that with farmland thriving in Steamfall, they had no need to risk raids in the Gift. John spent many hours settling disputes, reminding them of the importance of unity. Sometimes he felt more like a mediator than a king, but that was perhaps what the free folk needed. The day of the trade expedition arrived. A small caravan was formed, 4 sturdy sledges pulled by ponies or large dogs, laden with furs, dried meat, carved trinkets, even a few casks of a rough, fermented beverage the free folk called winter brew. Tormund and Val would lead the caravan, along with a dozen volunteers. John chose to stay in Steamfall, wanting to see how the first foray went before committing to more involvement. He watched from the gate as the caravan departed, the travelers waving back at the throng that gathered to see them off. It felt momentous, a sign that, for the first time in recent memory, the free folk were willingly engaging in commerce with the South, however small. Days passed. The settlement thrummed with a mild undercurrent of anticipation, wondering if the caravan would return with a triumph or a tragedy. John occupied himself with the usual tasks, presiding over minor judgments, walking the perimeter, conferring with the farmers and blacksmiths. In his quiet moments he thought of his siblings, wondered if it was finally time to send another message. The last attempt apparently never reached them. Perhaps the watch had neglected it. Perhaps it was devoured by ravens or lost in a storm. He pictured Sansa's face, Bran's distant gaze, Arya's fierce smile. Did they think him dead? Did they care that he had taken a new vow in the far north? He found himself wandering to the ring of standing stones near dusk one evening. That ancient monument still stood, etched with runes older than men. Snow had drifted around their bases, leaving them half-buried. Ghost prowled among them, sniffing curiously. Jon placed a hand on one of the stones, feeling the rough texture beneath his glove. An odd hush settled. For a fleeting moment he imagined faint whispers, as though the old gods spoke through the runes. He closed his eyes. A swirl of wind rustled his cloak. When he opened his eyes, the moment passed, replaced by the subdued stillness of twilight. He pushed away the sense of longing that threatened to overwhelm him. There was no time for that. The free folk needed him in the here and now. A week later, the caravan returned. The entire settlement rushed to greet them as they wound their way up the valley, sledges creaking. Tormund's laughter announced their success before words could. Val rode at his side, smiling through exhaustion, while the volunteers followed close behind. The sledges looked lighter. But that was because they'd exchanged so much of the original cargo. Now they carried sacks of grain, bundles of metal arrowheads, a cask or two of southern beer, and even a small supply of medicinal herbs. The watchers at the gate parted, letting them pass into the courtyard, where a throng of curious free folk waited. Tormund jumped down from his sledge, beaming. "Ha! The crows tried to haggle us to the bone, but we showed them how free folk bargain. We came back with more than they expected." Val slid off her horse, stretching her back. It wasn't easy, but it worked. No violence, no sabotage. We even met a few farmers from the Gift who came to see if the rumors were true. It's a start. No. A wave of excitement rippled through the crowd. Women pressed forward to see the quality of the grain. Farmers asked Val about the southern seeds. Some rummaged through the arrowheads, testing their points. Others peered curiously at the small casks of southern beer. Jon approached, feeling a mixture of pride and relief. "Well done," he said to Tormund and Val. "Any trouble on the road?" Tormund shook his head. "A few watchers with crossbows kept a close eye, but they let us trade in peace." Some farmers glared, but the ones who had goods to sell were eager enough for furs or northern crafts. The watchers tried to keep order, and they did. "Only one minor scuffle?" A free folk lad shoved a farmer who shorted him on coin. "We sorted it out." Val nodded. Riot wasn't there himself, but he'd sent a few older rangers to oversee the trade. They didn't cause trouble, and neither did we. Jon felt a weight lift from his shoulders. That's better news than I dared hope. They spent the rest of the day unloading the goods, distributing them among the settlement according to need. The council decreed that some portion of the grain should be set aside as seed stock, to see if the new farmland could support southern plants. The arrowheads went to replenish the communal armory. The casks of beer were tapped for an impromptu celebration around the main fire. Everyone wanted to hear Tormund's exaggerations of how he had haggled the crows blind, and how Val had used her womanly wiles to charm them into better deals, which earned him an icy glare from Val. But all the same, the mood was jubilant. That night, the fires in Steamfall burned brightly, the circle of huts alive with music and laughter. Jon sat on a simple wooden bench near the largest fire pit, watching as free folk danced in pairs, children shrieking with glee as they ducked between the dancers. Tormund roared a bawdy song with a group of hunters, while Val looked on with an exasperated grin. The sense of community was overwhelming, a testament to how far they'd come from the days of wandering, starving, and fighting off the dead. Ghost lay at Jon's feet, ears perked. Jon reached down to scratch behind the direwolf's ears. In that moment, he thought of all the sacrifices that had led here. The battles, the betrayals, the heartbreak. If this new peace truly took root, if the free folk could remain in the north unmolested, and the Gift could prosper without fear, perhaps it would be worth everything he had endured. He allowed himself a rare moment of calm in the flickering firelight, letting the laughter and music wash over him. But the peace would not go untested. The next morning, a shout echoed through the settlement. John, half-dressed, rushed from his hut to see a small commotion at the eastern gate. Guards pointed, calling for help. Climbing atop a wooden walkway, John looked beyond the gate. A lone rider approached at a gallop, weaving unsteadily on horseback. Steam rose from the horse's flanks, flecked with foam. As the rider drew nearer, John recognized the man as Auric, one of the scouts who patrolled beyond Steamfall's territory. He was slumped in the saddle, and his cloak was stained with something dark. John vaulted over the walkway's edge, landing in the snow, Ghost at his side. He rushed to meet Auric as the gates swung open. The horse stumbled in, and Auric nearly fell, only to be caught by two guards who steadied him. Blood soaked his left arm, and a crude bandage was tied around his midsection. His face was pallid with shock and pain. "Raiders!" Auric gasped, spitting blood. "North of here, they..." He coughed, wincing. "They took one of our outposts, killed everyone. Men, women, burned the huts." Alarm flared in John's mind. "Easy," he said, pressing a hand to Auric's uninjured shoulder. "We'll get you to the healer. Who attacked you?" Auric's eyes rolled, as though he fought to remain conscious. They wore the bones of beasts, painted their faces with blood. Some kind of mad clan. "I saw them butcher a child. Couldn't stop them." Wow. Dread coiled in John's chest. This sounded like the savage cults that refused all treaties, that worshipped dark forces. He exchanged a look with the guards, then turned back to Auric. "Where did this happen? How many?" "A day's ride north, maybe 40 or 50. They had no mercy, tore them apart. I barely escaped." Auric's voice quavered, tears brightening his eyes. I had to warn you." John clenched his jaw. "You did right. Let's get you cared for. We'll handle this." He motioned for the guards to carry Auric to the healer's hut, then pivoted to Tormund, who had just arrived, alarmed by the commotion. "Sound the call. We gather warriors. We leave as soon as we have a plan." Tormund nodded fiercely. "Hey, we'll gut these bastards." Val joined them, eyes wide with concern. 40 or 50, that's a large war party. We can't leave Steamfall undefended." "We won't," John said. "But we can't let them rampage unchecked." Auric said they're a day's ride away. If they move on another outpost or even on Steamfall, it'll be a massacre. In less than an hour, the settlement was in a flurry of activity. The council convened hastily. Karsa demanded they ride out at once. Hela Stonefist argued for a strategic approach. Scouts first, to gauge the raiders' exact location. People quarreled, frightened at the prospect of a large band of bloodthirsty savages. Eventually, John formed a plan. He would lead a war party of 25 skilled fighters, including Tormund, Karsa, and Val. Another group of defenders would remain behind in case of a surprise attack. Swift riders would scout ahead to confirm the raiders' position. If they caught them by surprise, they might defeat them before the cult could move further south. Preparations began. Warriors strapped on boiled leather, sharpened spears, readied bows. Provisions were packed for a swift, hard ride. John donned his old black cloak, worn and patched, but also wore a chest piece hammered in the settlement's smithy, reinforced with steel plates scavenged from various sources. The black iron crown remained behind. This was no time for symbols. Ghost sensed the tension, pacing restlessly. John stroked the direwolf's flank, reminding him to stay calm. By midday, they departed. A hush fell as the war party rode out. The settlement's gates closed behind them. Already, a group of outriders had gone ahead to locate the enemy. John's mind raced with strategy. These savages, he had encountered similar ones before, those who worshipped twisted spirits of ice and dark gods. They mutilated their victims, thrived on terror. If they'd grown to 50 strong, they were a serious threat to any outpost. John thought grimly of the families who might cross their path. They rode hard, traveling north into harsher terrain. The wind picked up, stinging exposed skin. Snow flurries dusted their fur cloaks. Tormund led the vanguard, bellowing for speed. Karsa rode near John, axes strapped on her back, her expression set in stone. Val handled her mount with quiet skill, her bow slung across her shoulders. Every so often, scouts looped back to report. By nightfall, the outriders had found the ravaged outpost. 5 huts burned to cinders, bodies strewn in the snow, partially devoured or dismembered. John forced himself to remain stoic as they surveyed the carnage by torchlight. Ghost prowled among the ruins, growling, hackles raised. It was the worst brutality John had seen since the days of the White Walkers. Children's small forms lay in the ashes. Tormund's voice trembled with rage. "We track these devils and feed them to the crows." They pressed on a short distance, making camp in a sheltered hollow. Sleep was fitful. Some men and women wept for the slaughtered outpost. Others sharpened weapons in furious silence. Before dawn, the scouts returned with news. They had located the enemy's camp. The cultists had pitched crude tents in a rocky gorge. Fires glowed in the darkness, silhouettes moving about in savage rites. They appeared unguarded, possibly drunk or feasting on their ill-gotten spoils. If the free folk attacked at first light, they might catch them unprepared. John roused the war party. They checked armor, weapons, buckles. The air was electric with tension, breath steaming in the pre-dawn chill. John gathered them in a tight circle, speaking in a low, firm voice. "These raiders butchered innocent families. They worship blood and death. Show them no mercy, for they'll give you none. Strike swift, strike hard. We are free folk, and we will not allow this evil to take root in our land." A muted growl of assent rose. They moved out in silence, guided by the scouts who knew the path. In the east, a thin line of light touched the horizon, revealing a sky of shifting purples and pale blues. The gorge came into view, jagged cliffs rising on both sides. Down below, the flicker of embers signaled where the cultists camped. John dismounted, motioning for the others to do the same. They would proceed on foot to maintain the element of surprise. Ghost lunged forward, leading the way, ears flat. John, Tormund, Karsa, Val, and the others followed carefully, hearts pounding. As they drew closer, they heard muffled chanting, eerie in the still air. The stench of decay wafted up from the gorge. John signaled for the party to split into 2 flanking groups. Tormund led one side, Karsa led the other, and John took Val, Ghost, and a handful of warriors down the center. The plan was to converge simultaneously, giving the cultists no time to organize. They crept among boulders, snow crunching softly underfoot. The chanting grew louder, accompanied by the crackle of flames. Then they saw it, a clearing in the bottom of the gorge lit by large bonfires. Shadowy figures danced around crude totems, constructed from bones and charred wood. The ground was slick with blood. A lump rose in Joan's throat when he saw severed human heads mounted on spikes. The cultists themselves were half naked in the cold, their skin covered in swirling patterns of dried blood, their eyes wild with mania. One figure, presumably their leader, stood near a makeshift altar, brandishing a curved blade. In the glow of the flames it gleamed with fresh gore. No more waiting. John raised Longclaw, its steel reflecting the firelight. With a shout he charged. The war party erupted from the darkness, weapons raised, voices echoing off the canyon walls. The cultists whirled in surprise, many scrambling for weapons or simply snarling like beasts. Tormund's group descended from one side with a thunderous roar, axes flashing. Karsa's group attacked from the other, driving spears into the howling savages. John rushed the center, Val's arrows whistling past him to bury themselves in cultist chests. Ghost lunged at a man who tried to block Joan's path, savaging his arm. John swung Longclaw in a deadly arc, cleaving another's torso. The shock of battle filled his veins with icy resolve. These cultists deserved no quarter. The memory of the butchered outpost fueled his every strike. Screams and the clash of steel on bone rang in his ears. Sparks flew from the bonfires as the attackers and defenders tangled in a furious melee. Despite their savage nature, some cultists were adept fighters, wielding bone daggers or stolen steel. They hurled themselves at John's men with reckless abandon. One lunged at John with a spear, nearly catching him in the side. John twisted away, slashed downward, severing the spear and the cultist's forearm in a single blow. Blood sprayed on the snow. Another cultist came from behind, screeching, only to be felled by an arrow from Val. Across the clearing, Tormund hacked down 2 foes, roaring curses. Karsa battered a hulking cultist with her axes, each strike sending crimson droplets into the air. Shouts of pain and fury tore through the gorge. The bonfires raged, casting flickering shadows of madness on the canyon walls. John spotted their leader near the altar, chanting in a guttural tongue. The cult leader raised the curved blade high, as if calling on dark powers. Ghosts bounded forward, snapping at the man's legs. The leader kicked at the direwolf, then turned to run. John surged after him, cutting through a pair of lesser cultists who tried to bar his way. Each kill felt like a blow struck for the murdered families. The leader fled up a rocky path that led higher into the gorge. John gestured to Val, who nodded, continuing to fight below. He sprinted after the leader, heart hammering in his ears. The path was treacherous, strewn with loose stones. The cult leader scrambled ahead, nimble despite the blood-caked blade in hand. John pushed on, boots skidding on ice. His breath rasped in the cold air. Up ahead, the cult leader turned and snarled, brandishing the blade. He wore a macabre headdress of animal skulls, ragged hair matted with gore. His eyes gleamed with delirious intensity. He lunged, blade slashing. John parried, the clang of steel echoing. Sparks danced. The man slashed again, forcing John to step back onto a patch of loose gravel. John's foot slipped and he barely maintained his balance, lifting Longclaw to block another blow. The cult leader spat curses in some unknown language. Their blades locked, face to face. John smelled rotting flesh on the man's breath. With a grimace, John twisted, forcing the man's blade wide. He slammed his fist into the cult leader's jaw, staggering him. The man recovered instantly, trying to bring the curved blade up for a thrust. John sidestepped, letting the momentum carry the savage forward, then drove Longclaw straight into his side. The cult leader gasped, dropping the blade. He collapsed, spattering blood on the snowy rocks. Why? John ground out, breath heaving. Why kill innocents, children? The cult leader's lips curled in a grin that showed broken teeth. He coughed up blood, a hideous gargle. Blood. For the old powers. The night. That never ends. He laughed a strangled sound, then went limp, eyes rolling back. John yanked Longclaw free, disgust twisting his stomach. He stood there panting, listening to the distant clash of steel below. The leader was dead, but the memory of his final words chilled John. Some savage cults still worshipped the memory of the long night, the ancient darkness that once threatened the living. Even with the White Walkers gone, twisted remnants of that fear lingered. John turned to descend the path, mind reeling. Below, the battle was nearly done. Most cultists lay dead or dying. A few fled into the dark recesses of the gorge, pursued by Karsa and Tormund's warriors. Ghost harried a wounded savage who stumbled moaning. Val knelt by one of their own fighters, who had taken a knife to the gut. Shouts of victory mingled with cries of pain. Flames still licked the sky, stoked by the bone totems. John hurried to Val's side. The wounded fighter was a young woman, Rena, who had fought valiantly in the farmland expansions. Blood seeped through her fingers. Val pressed cloth against the wound, her face grim. "We need the healer's kit." John waved over one of the others. They fetched supplies and set to work. Meanwhile, Tormund stomped through the carnage, searching for survivors among the cult. He found none willing to surrender. Any who remained attacked or fled. Karsa wiped her axis, her expression cold as she surveyed the butchered remains of their foes. When the last cultist was dispatched or escaped, the war party regrouped. They had lost 3 fighters with several more badly wounded. Grief and anger mingled in the gloom. The savage camp was a testament to unspeakable cruelty. Skulls, dismembered limbs, trophies. The free folk eyed the horrors with drawn faces. Tormund spat at one of the bone totems, cursing. "Burn it all." Karsa nodded. "Burn everything. We can't leave this filth to poison the land." They gathered the cultists' bodies in a pile, setting them ablaze with a mix of torches and lamp oil. The stench was horrifying, but no one flinched. Some recited quiet curses upon the savage gods the cult had worshipped. Others silently glowered. Ghost whined, pacing near John, unsettled by the carnage. John stared at the flames, a heavy ache in his chest. He thought of the outpost families, the children. They would avenge them, but it was small solace. Before dawn broke in full, they buried their own dead in a rocky patch outside the gorge. Tormund led a brief, somber rite, recounting the fallen's deeds. He hammered a wooden marker for each. Val and Karsa stood silent, heads bowed. The survivors bandaged wounds, readied their supplies, and prepared to return to Steamfall. The cult was shattered, but pockets might remain. There was always a chance some had slipped away, to hide and fester. Jon hoped none of them would resurface. They set out under a pall of grief. At least they had prevented further atrocities. It was a reminder that for all their efforts at building a peaceful realm, the North remained a land of lurking horrors and lawless clans. Jon rode at the head of the column, Ghost trotting wearily. Tormund rode next to him, silent, occasionally muttering curses at the memory of the slaughter. Val tried to comfort Rena, who groaned in pain despite the bandages. Karsa kept watch on the flanks, scanning for any hidden threats. By the time they reached Steamfall, 2 days later, the wounded were in dire need of the healer's care. Rena barely clung to life. The entire settlement turned out to greet them, anxious faces searching for loved ones. Jon dismounted stiffly, legs aching, and delivered the grim news to the council. Another wave of shock spread at the mention of the child victims and the cult's depravity. Many spat at the ground, cursing the savage gods. Others wept for the families lost at the outpost. Harith approached Jon afterward, her face taut with anger. "These devils, are there more out there? My people fled savage raids at the frozen shore. Could it be the same group?" Jon shook his head. "They worship the same kind of horrors, but we destroyed their main camp. Some may still roam. We'll need to patrol carefully, warn every outpost to be on guard." And so a new wave of vigilance settled over Steamfall. Patrols were doubled. Scouts ranged further than before, seeking any sign of savage remnants. The settlement grieved their dead and honored them with solemn rites. Some worried that the cult might strike again or that other dark forces lurked in the corners of the North. Jon shared these concerns, though he tried to project confidence. He reminded the people that they had rallied and defeated the threat. Tormund boasted that any raiders who dared approach Steamfall would meet the same fate. In the midst of this heightened vigilance, the second trade caravan prepared to depart for Queensgate. Jon wondered if the Southern Watchers would hear of the cult's atrocities, if it might affect their willingness to trade or extend cooperation. He decided to send them a message, explaining what had happened, how Steamfall had dealt with the threat, hoping it might reinforce the idea that the free folk were not lawless monsters. Time rolled on, measured in the changing skies and the slow thaw that brought an early spring to the valley. Steamfall's farmland sprouted green shoots beneath the protective warmth of the hot springs. Caribou herds ventured closer, providing abundant hunting. The second trade caravan returned successfully, with more grain and even a handful of steel implements that would improve forging. The Watchers, it seemed, were content to maintain the tenuous alliance. Jon found himself standing at a precipice. Steamfall was growing stronger, forging an identity beyond the old wildling ways. They had farmland, trade, watchtowers, a council. They had a king, reluctant though he was. And they had repelled threats from inside and out. He thought often of how far they had come since the White Walkers nearly destroyed them all. Yet he also felt the weight of new challenges. Could Steamfall continue expanding without drawing the jealousy or fear of Southern lords? Would the free folk accept more structure, or would old clan rivalries resurface? Late one afternoon, as the sun cast a gentle glow across the valley, Jon walked the perimeter with Ghost. He paused at a new watchtower still under construction. The workers nodded respectfully, stepping aside to let him climb the wooden steps. From the top he surveyed Steamfall in the golden light, the sprawl of huts and stone buildings, the farmland fed by steaming channels, the ring of protective fences. Smoke curled from the chimneys, the hum of life pulsed below. He remembered the oath he once swore, "I am the shield that guards the realms of men." Once, that had meant standing on the wall, defending the 7 kingdoms from what lay beyond. Now it meant standing here, guarding the free folk from the savagery of the wilderness and the threat of renewed southern aggression. He had walked both sides of the wall, died and returned, fought in wars he never imagined. And here he was, crowned king beyond the wall, forging a new realm in a land once deemed ungovernable. The wind teased strands of his hair, and he lifted his gaze to the horizon. Purple clouds gathered in the distance, heralding another storm. But for the moment, the sun bathed Steamfall in warm light, a fleeting gift of peace. Ghost joined him at the tower's edge, ears perked, muzzle lifted to the breeze. Jon placed a hand on the direwolf's thick fur and exhaled, letting the tension ease from his shoulders. He knew the road ahead would be long, fraught with perils and triumphs alike. He also knew that, for all his regrets, he had found a purpose in leading these people, in helping them carve out a life free from the tyranny of the South and the terrors of the far North. The free folk were his people now, and he was theirs, by choice, by fate, by the forging of bonds stronger than blood. As the sun dipped lower, bathing the valley in copper hues, Jon stood watch, a quiet sentinel. Below, the city bustled with children's laughter, the pounding of hammers, the chatter of traders. Above, the sky stretched vast and infinite, holding secrets of old magic and half-forgotten gods. And in Jon Snow's heart, a steady resolve took root, a promise to guide this fragile kingdom through every storm, to unite the free folk in the face of all that threatened them. If fate had made him their king, he would serve as best he could, with humility and courage, until the final page of his story was written in the snow of the far north. He closed his eyes for just a moment, listening to the wind, the distant voices, the steady rhythm of Ghost's breathing. The taste of cold air was sharp on his tongue. In that quiet moment he felt the presence of all those he had loved and lost. Ned Stark, Ygritte, the brothers of the Watch who had died for the living. Their spirits wove through him, reminding him that his duty was not a lonely path. He carried them with him, every step of the way,